Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of October 25th. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I would like to call the meeting to order. And we'll start tonight with a roll call.
Commissioner Sy?
Here.
Commissioner Woodward?
Present.
Chair Williams?
Here.
Commissioners Amir and DeFever are absent tonight.
Thank you. So before we start tonight's public hearing, our hearing on the public items, this is an opportunity for people to speak to any agenda item or any matter, I should say, that does not appear on tonight's agenda. So if there's anyone in the room or on Zoom who would like to address an issue that doesn't appear on the agenda, this is the time to do so. I do see a hand in the audience. So yes, please step up and you'll have 3 minutes to make a comment, not on the item that appears before us this, yes. Please state your name for the record. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, perfect.
Hi, everyone. My name is Uri Sarid. We live on 82 Alcatraz near the tip of Corinthian Island and across the water from Sam's. And recently, we have been very, very troubled by the volume of music that they've been playing. I know they got a few years ago a permit for amplified music, and boy, do they use it. I don't know if I'm allowed to play. I recorded last night at 8 p.m., but we could have been dancing on our patio or frankly in our living room at the volume that they were playing. We've tried calling the manager. They usually are not answering at that time. We've called the police a couple of times. They're very kind. They go over there, they talk to them. Sometimes they convince them to turn it down. Sometimes they say, well, it's just going to go on for another hour or two. But it's very hard to live this way when we have to celebrate at the same almost volume that they're celebrating over there. So I was wondering if there's any way to revisit that permit or in some way allow us to hang out, not just outdoors, but even in our own living rooms while they're having various events on the patio with the music facing the water. So thanks for your consideration.
Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention.
Yep.
Is there anyone else in the audience or online who wishes to make any remarks? I don't see anyone present with us. Anyone online? Great. Okay, thank you. One thing I wanted to, just a note for people who do speak, if you could wait until you see the 3 minutes appear on the screen before you introduce yourself and start your remarks. We're learning new technology tonight, so we'd appreciate that very much. Before we begin getting into the substance of this evening's agenda, is there any updates or a briefing for the commissioners generally?
I have none tonight.
Great. Let's then turn to, we do have some minutes from our previous meeting, which was the minutes of, forgive me, let me check my.
It's the minutes of August 23rd.
Thank you. I just had, I prepared some, my own agenda and I had the wrong date. So I was not present. I was sick that evening. I was not present for that meeting. So I don't have any comments. I'll abstain this evening from voting on that. But I do ask my fellow commissioners if there are any comments or revisions to the minutes.
I was at the meeting. I have no proposed revisions, and so I'm happy to move the minutes.
Great. So you made a motion to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion. Oh, did you say aye?
I did.
Okay. I am abstaining. So that's two votes in favor of approving the minutes. So the minutes are approved. And next we'll turn to our public hearing item for the evening, which is consideration. It's actually, we're considering whether or not to recommend town initiated municipal code amendments to the town council. Is there a staff I'm sure there is
So
a staff.
What's going to be
briefing.
done tonight is, I have two consultants. One is Matt Taker, or am I saying it correctly? And Bob Brown, who will be presenting tonight. We have a PowerPoint presentation and we have information, sort of will bring the public and the commission through the staff report and the attachments thereof.
That will be so helpful to us.
And
Thank
if
you
you
so
give
much.
me a moment, we're gonna open the PowerPoint presentation.
Very good.
Thank you. One moment for technical difficulties with this projector, which is standard.
It is.
Why don't you,
I don't think the PowerPoint started.
So turn the button on the other side.
Huh?
We were having a lot of technical difficulties.
I did.
oh,
I don't think the PowerPoint's actually started.
Here. Oh, see the event.
Yeah. yeah.
The PowerPoint's not actually started.
It's because I use the PDF.
Oh, dance.
It's because I use
Oh.
the PDF.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, very good. Thanks so much. I'll start the presentation and hand off to Matt. So very quickly, in terms of the agenda and for our presentation, we'll just briefly summarize what the action the Planning Commission has before you this evening. Why we're actually recommending the adoption of objective design and development standards for multifamily development. Matt will then walk through the proposed amendments, particularly in terms of the design criteria that are proposed for the code and the recommendations embedded there. And then we'll return this back to the Planning Commission for your discussion, public hearing, and then action. So just to summarize, next slide. So what's before the Planning Commission tonight is for your consideration as to whether you choose to recommend to the council, the town council, amendments to the zoning code and the town zoning map that would first create a new R310 zone. And that zone has the exact same regulations as the current R3 zone, but the difference is that it requires a minimum of 10 units per acre. And that comes directly from the housing element for the R310 designated site proposed in the housing element. And next are the objective development and design standards. We abbreviate that as ODDS, again, for multifamily development in all three of the multifamily zones. And then lastly, rezoning the site at 4576 Paradise Drive, that's site H in the housing element, to R310. Next slide. But why are we proposing that the town adopt odds? And that's because of the changes in state law. So currently under state law, any new multifamily project that consists of adding 2 or more new units, those projects can qualify for ministerial approval if they meet certain criteria. And if that's the case, then the project is only evaluated based upon its compliance with whatever adopted odds the town has in place. For projects that don't qualify for ministerial approval, but still have 2 or more new units, those projects, you can still do your subjective design review as you have in the past, but those projects, if they comply with the odds, those projects can't have their density reduced or the projects cannot be denied. So again, that's the effect of state law now on the decision-making process for development review. Next slide. And the way the state defines objective standards, they can involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official. They have to be verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark and knowable by both the development applicant and the public official. So things like setbacks, height limits, things that are numeric, those are objective. Things that speak to compatibility with surrounding properties and that sort of thing, harmonious with the surrounding environment. Those subjective standards cannot be used for projects that qualify under these state laws. Next. And in the case of developing these multifamily odds, we liberally started using the hillside design guidelines that the town adopted in 1981. These were really developed for single family home construction, but many of the concepts and ideas are applicable to multifamily as well. And so we've worked with the Design Review Board to try to convert a lot of the hillside guidelines into objective standards. And the last point there is, again, based upon the adoption of the housing element, these objective standards need to be able to meet the number of units that are called for the housing opportunity sites in the new housing element. So again, in developing these standards, the densities, the criteria, we've kept that in mind and made sure that we could indeed accommodate the number of units that are called for in the housing element. And the next slide, I think in terms of applicability, again, these odds will apply to all the multifamily sites in town. So the R3, R310, and R4. And you can see the R310 site designated, that's the 4576 Paradise Drive that is subject to the possible rezoning. And with that, I will turn this over to my colleague, Matt, to describe the design criteria.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I'm Matt Tacker. I'm an architect and urban planner, work with Wallace Robertson Todd. First, we'll take a look at the outline of the recommended zoning changes. Everything resides within the section 1621, the residential section. And there are subsections within that where we want to keep the existing structure. Where we'd be talking about the development standards, certain aspects of the development standards as they're already presented. Open space standards is something that's provided for. There are some density standards that actually are different than the density standards that are in the development standards. Those don't really apply. And then we're into sections that are specific to the R3, R310, and R4 designation. And they deal with development characteristics that more conventional zoning codes usually don't, but because the state now requires that there be a ministerial path, in other words, clear objective standards in advance of project applications. And because most communities are really concerned about the character of development, the design character of development, trying to maintain new buildings so that they are fit compatibly with the existing. You have to get into a lot of aspects of design and development that up to this point you haven't had to. Next. So if we just kind of get it right into it, then the recommendations, First, we're just going to deal with some site level standards, planning and engineering next. And this is kind of sums up things like lot size, residential density. Residential density are things that are aspects that were set by your housing element that was adopted. And then lot coverage, that's the only place where we recommend that there be a modest relaxation of the lot coverage for the R4. That's what we discovered in just examining the site and doing some math on it on representative sites we looked at. And then floor area ratios, sticking with what's already there. And then if you use all those factors and just do some simple math, it results in kind of a general understanding of how big the unit sizes might end up being. So, you know, up to 1,300 or so square feet for the R3 and R310, up to 1,100 feet or so for the R4 next. And then, you know, one aspect of site planning is retaining walls. And this is actually a pretty good illustration of how what you've got now is not objective and how it would get then translated into objective standards. Right now, it's, you know, up to 3.5 feet ministerially, which means that there's a discretionary review process without it being sort of explicitly okay. If you want to go more than 3.5 feet. And so what we've recommended is that there's up to 3.5 feet within setback areas and up to 6 feet outside of setback areas. And then to allow for very deep cuts below buildings, such as to provide for parking. And we'll look at the building height recommendations in a minute, but by doing that under the building and by allowing for deep cuts and all, the idea is to really kind of keep the profile of the building below grade, if you will, the bulk below grade as much as possible. Next. Another aspect of site planning has to do with vegetation and drainage. Again, we have to, you know, anticipate every condition. Kind of rolling the general plan policy C9 into objective standards is 50-foot setback from streams for project sites up to 5 acres, but otherwise 100 feet for larger sites. Heritage trees is an example of something that has been generally dealt with in a discretionary way in the past, but because there has to be a ministerial path for affordable housing, we're proposing that any heritage tree that is removed, that there would be a 2-to-1 replacement. And there would be a report by a certified arborist in order to bring the information that we need to determine conformance to this code. Next. Grading is another thing. The top and the toe of the slope needs to transition so that it has a more of a natural appearance, as the diagrams on top illustrate. And then no development where the existing slope exceeds 30%. So you got to have the development stay off the steep slopes, but then there's an exception within 25 feet of the perimeter of those 30% slopes. You would allow there to be development or disturbance of the ground. Why is that? That's because when you do the analysis to determine 30% slope, there are very often islands of 30% slope that you know, a site engineer would grade away. It also just gives you some flexibility in terms of transitioning into those steeper slopes. And so that's the nature of the recommendation there. And this would all be informed by a licensed engineer's report. Next. There is a modification to this standard that deals with the 30% slope and this 25% perimeter that's been added. That is because there will also be islands that are under 30% within the area that's largely 30%. And that we wouldn't want to be suggesting developers that they should somehow leapfrog into those areas and be able to build something. Next. Building height. Next. So the current standard for R3 and R4 is 30 feet. We're recommending that this be increased to 35 feet and limited to 3 stories. And the reason is that the densities in the housing element, this relaxation of just 5 feet is the difference between having the possibility that development would not be feasible at those densities and making that development feasible. Another change is that this measure is from existing grade only. So what are the implications of that? By measuring it from existing grade only, you're really providing an incentive to the developer to dig into the hillsides as much as possible, and thereby reduce the amount of visible bulk that projects up. And so this height requirement, the 35 feet and all, has been studied extensively. And you can see in those diagrams on the right, the lower, the dashed line on the top is the limit. The lower dashed line in red is the assumed existing grade, and you can see the extent to which a 3-story building would have to really be dug into the slope. Next. And a few examples of that being the case in Tiburon. This is Chandler's Gate. I think this is Ned's Way. The slope is over 15%, maybe as much as 20%. Density is about 13 dwelling units per acre. And you can see what it looks like from the street. This actually would conform with the development standards, and that the garage entrance is a lesser part of the frontage that faces the street. You know, buildings with windows and all would be the greater part of that frontage. And that the parking is below grade. You can see the lower left, the aerial photo. In this case, there's a parking structure that's below the shared courtyard for this project. Next. And so then there's a cross section that gives you a sense of, you know, how it works and how the uphill townhouses are up a full story compared with the downhill townhouses. Next. This is a rather innovative project in Mill Valley, close to you. This is on a hillside that's over 25%, so quite steep. It has a density of about 10 dwelling units per acre. And it has development that's not organized around courtyards where you've got residential on both sides of the courtyard, but rather around what I call a shared court, which is a very pedestrian friendly driveway that has 1-story garages along one side of it, while having building entrances and landscaping on the other side. So if we go to the next, you see, well, okay, and then this is what it looks like and gives you a sense of the steepness of the hill. I'll show you a photograph of how that shared court looks a little later in the presentation. Next. And then we're into setbacks, and in order to get more of a sense of openness and green in new development, our recommendation is actually to increase the setbacks. Keep the front setback to the building at 15 feet, but if it's a street side, the side of a building that faces a street, go from the current standard of 8 feet to 15 feet, so increasing it 7 feet, more yard. Keep the garage setback at 20, and then the interior side and rear setback, increase that from 8 to 20, so increase it by 12 feet along side and rear property lines, but allow an exception for 1-story garages to fit in what is an efficient way from site planning perspective, closer to those property edges. Next. And we'll come back to the way that the step backs provide what we call a green seam through projects in a minute. Also, dealing with building width and the massing, so that we want to have the multifamily housing have more of a scale, that's more similar to the residential development that now exists. So while and the building width would be limited, that building width is roughly a small block, in a town. But then not allowing a massing increment, not allowing the building that really comes closest to the street to exceed 60 feet. So you could have multiple massing increments that would be interrupted by a recess. So you get the appearance of separate buildings. And in a minute, I'll also talk about that notched out area that's at the corners here. Next. The green seam, I mentioned it. By increasing the setbacks, you get just more greenery, more openness, a greater likelihood that views, through the project will be maintained. A paseo is also a required feature for units that are not facing the street. And so that's another way that the seam can be required, and requiring the paseo to open up more as it approaches the street, so that you can get oblique views or angled views through the project more easily. And then the step backs are at the corner, where you have to notch out the building at the corner so that you can see past the building more easily again. So you get sort of angled views. We'll look at a diagram for that in a second. Next. Here's that step back at corners. We looked at other step back options, and not having with the DRB, not having any step back, and then also having a step back across the entire front, which is really very difficult to make a coherent architectural composition that way, and kind of arrived at putting the step back where you're going to get the most benefit, which is at these corners of the buildings. And one is just driving in today. One characteristic of the hillside multifamily that you presently have is that they look like boxes, right? And so this really forces the builder to do something special at the corner to break up what would otherwise be a box. Next. There's your oblique view. If this is the diagram is drawn as if the site were flat, but if the site were sloping away from the street, standing on that sidewalk there, you might be able to see, past the building more easily towards more distant views. Next. Another thing that isn't dealt with in conventional zoning is the character of your street frontages, and yet that's so important to maintaining a neighborhood character. Next. And so for one thing, requiring that buildings address the street with entrances and windows and community open space, things that provide that make it more pedestrian friendly, attract more activity, and are not deadening the way a parking lot is or a blank wall would be. Next. And to give you some sense of that, this is Red Hills Circle. Two different projects that were built. The one on the top, you can see the facades are comprised nearly 100% of a garage, and not even able to see how you would even enter that, and the kind of I'll call it a deadening effect that has on the pedestrian experience. And then below, I think, is a much more successful model, where the garage comprises roughly 60% of the front. And we're requiring that the garage not be more than 50%. So you'd even have an even greater, you'd be able to see the entrance, which is right there. You can see there's kind of like little porch elements. We have more entrance and more landscaping, even more than what's shown there. Next. The standards give a great deal of attention to the building entrances. This is where really so many, literally the building and the public realm come together. And so really wanting to make sure that the entrances work functionally, but then also create a kind of small town character. Next. One of the aspects that's dealt with in the entrances and one other place in the code is that the living units are not to be more than 4 feet above the finished grade, so that you get a sense of connection. You can see right here, this is the finished grade here. This is up probably about 3 feet, so you still get a sense of connection between that and the street or the paseo. But occasionally, a builder's gonna want to get a garage in there, and you can see this is more than 4 feet, and so the site needs to slope up from there. So this exception, this refinement to what the Planning Commission already received, is illustrated here. Next, building scale and design. Now we're getting into lots of other things that really make a difference in terms of how the building appears. We're rolling things that are already in your residential design standards into the objective development standards. So things like limiting the projecting decks, not allowing projecting decks, really deep decks like this on the upper stories, so you have more of a sense of going to be able to see more sky. Limiting the eaves and other overhangs. Principal roof parallels the slope. And then limiting the height of the downslope gables, so that gable end is sort of the triangle that faces towards you, and not allowing that on downslope, again, as a way of sort of reducing the apparent height as seen from down below. Next. Transparency is a very important design feature, particularly along streets, because it gives you that sense of presence, of living space on the street, eyes on the street. It makes streets more inviting. Also, kind of keeps an eye on things. And so windows and door area have to be at least 25% of the facade. Next. And to provide some relief to avoid projects that are just a single material and kind of somewhat monotonous because of it. No single material could be more than 40%. Remember that 25% is comprised of windows and doors. So it'd be up to the architect to figure out exactly how to distribute the materials. Next. And then grayscale, as seen from a distance, buildings that are more in the middle range of gray are more likely to blend into the slope. If it's too light, it's bright against the rest of the hillside. If it's too dark, it can be dark during certain times of the year. Can be too dark against the surrounding hillside. And so this is grayscale, and grayscale also applies to colors. So even though these have different hues, they all illustrate grayscale. Next. And allowed and prohibited materials, really want to avoid materials that don't weather well over time, and don't weather well over time. Also mirrored glass, things like that. Next. Then open space and other improvements. The open space standards next are the same, remain the same as has already been established. But because we're talking about multifamily units, to give more flexibility in terms of how that open space requirement can be allocated, Part of it would have to remain with the unit, private open space, balcony or yard or terrace. But the remainder could be in private open space, or it could be applied towards semi-private community open space. And the standards define different forms of community open space and what would be required. This image on the left is one that I mentioned earlier. This is the De Silva project again, the one that's, 25% slope and all. And this is the shared court where you got the garage on one side and the building entrances and landscaping on the other side. The driveway, the number of garages is relatively few, so there's very little traffic coming and going. It's a dead end, you can see. And then the paving on it is expressed as like a plaza would be. Those are called unit pavers. And so even though this has auto access, it's also very pedestrian friendly. And because it offers a developer flexibility, and it's hard to know exactly, when a site is going to be difficult in any particular way. We've included this housing typology. We've addressed it within the code. We've allowed it in the code. Next. And then we, deal with things like the landscape design standards. The short note on that is that after you take space away, ground area away for the building, away for the sidewalk, away from driveways and away from utilities, then 90% of the remainder needs to be landscaped. So a lot of green. Got to deal with fences and walls in a way that isn't provided for yet in the code. The parking design standards, the parking rates remain the same as what you've got now. But in order to reduce the footprint of development, in order to allow the buildings to be more compact, allowing tandem parking and lifts. So tandem parking is end-to-end parking. That would be two spaces that are used by the same dwelling unit. Lifts are mechanical lifts, so those are stacked parking, allowing that, and you see that quite a bit in development recently. It's a great way to provide for greater density while keeping a pretty compact building footprint. If there's a parking lot, there's visual screening standards that aren't present now in your code, and then we have to try to anticipate everything. So we can't just worry about what's behind the property line on the site itself. We have to also worry about what's in front of the property line and take care of things that are normally required in more of a negotiated way by development. So, requiring a sidewalk with a landscape strip. So that would be the sidewalk and then a landscape strip and then the curb. And then where the traffic is, where there's no existing sidewalk. Except to not require the sidewalk if it's in a more outlying area where there's no network of sidewalk to connect to. And then also worrying about bicycle facilities that are designated by the general plan and requiring developer to provide those on their side of the street as well. Next. So in conclusion, getting back to the points that Bob introduced earlier, next, what we're here to discuss tonight is the creation of, to take care of the creation of the R310 zone, which is called for by the housing element, to put in place or recommend to the town council to put in place objective development and design standards, a summary for which you just saw. And then also, for discussion is the rezoning of the Paradise Drive site to R310 which again is a feature of your adopted housing element. So that, yeah, so that concludes it. There's a little backup information if the conversation goes there.
Thank you so much for that presentation, for adding the additional imagery and detail that we didn't see in the staff report. That was very helpful. This is an opportunity now for the commissioners to ask questions of the staff and the consultants about the report before we open for public comment. So I'll turn to my fellow commissioners. I have a few questions, but I'll start with Commissioners Sy or Woodward if they have questions of staff.
I have a couple of questions, Matt. The first one is, you mentioned the 35-foot height issue, and you made the point that I think I understood as to why you were recommending 35 and not 30. One of the reasons, if I understood right, was because 35 would actually encourage deeper development into grade. Do I have that right so far?
It's a way of getting to the densities that your housing element calls for in a way that pushes it deeper.
Okay.
And thereby also leaving more site area for landscaping and other things.
And is that because the 35, the actual calculation of the 35 is from the very bottom, which is below grade, all the way to the top? That's not the reason. So I guess I'm a little confused then, because as I was looking at the image on the slide that you had one was an example of 30, it looked like, and then one was 35 next to it. So I think I'm a little confused as to the correlation between 35 and how that relates to encouraging development deeper down in grade.
Yeah.
And it may be helpful if it's possible, it's nice to refer back to slides, and I will be asking to look at a slide or two if that's possible.
The going to 35 by itself does not encourage it to go below grade. What it does is it allows a developer to opt for to arrive at the density that is called for through your housing element, to arrive at it without spreading out over more of the site. So they could have a smaller building footprint, and in doing so, that would also require them to go deeper. So I may have misstated it earlier.
I think I now understand. The reality is that the issue of going below grade is actually a separate point. It's actually, yeah, it's a separate point from the issue of 30 versus 35. I think you were making the broader point that there are a couple of different ways of attacking this issue of how to create more density that doesn't result in sprawl sideways.
Yes.
One of which is to go higher and also to go lower.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I
Precisely.
think I
And
understand.
that's
Thank you.
particularly helpful on the slope sites.
Mhm.
It's very difficult to get 3 stories within 30 feet in the current height limit, particularly on the slope site. So
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. One other quick point of clarification. You use the example of the multi-housing development that's right near Reed School, Charles Gate. Is that-
Chandler's Gate.
I'm sorry, what was it?
I think it's Chandler's Gate.
Chandler's Gate, sorry.
Mhm.
I apologize to Mr. Chandler. So what is that zoned at? What is that area right there zoned at? Does anyone know? It's not an R4 or
the only R4, and I should have mentioned this earlier, the only R4 site in town is the vacant portion of the Reed School site.
Oh,
So-
okay. But for Chandler's Gate, does anyone know what that is zoned at? That
It's probably R3. It's a medium density, yeah,
Either that or RMP. I'm not sure which.
or RMP. I actually don't know the exact one, but I can take a look if it's important to do that.
And Dina, I have a few questions as it relates to specific red lines and the amendments, but I'm not sure if that is, and maybe I should direct this to the chair. I apologize as to when would be the appropriate time to address those. It may not be now, by the way, so I don't know.
yeah. How many comments do you have?
Good enough. See where it goes. I just have a few questions in various
Right.
pages, but again, I'm
Right.
happy to wait until the right time to
Right.
address some of those.
You could do it now or when you finish your
Yeah,
deliberations.
let's see let's kind of go with our overarching sort of substantive questions, and we'll see where we are.
That's fine. Those are all my questions. Your Honor.
Excellent.
Thank you for the
Excellent.
presentation.
Yes, oh, Commissioner Woodward.
Yeah, I also, thank you for the presentation, very helpful to have the graphics. With it, I think I had this.
Is your mic on, Commissioner? Sorry.
That better?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
So I'll reiterate, thank you for the presentation and for the graphics. It's helpful. I had the same question on the 35 feet, so I think I understand that. In particular, it's sort of a choice of, do you sprawl, do you go tall? And on the setbacks, you maybe get the benefit of leaning into the mountain, which seems more attractive maybe than spreading out, especially given all the greenery that you're going to do. So thanks for giving all of that color. That was very helpful. I think my main question is, does the 35 feet zoning apply to all, so that'd be all R310 zones that we're looking to zone here tonight? Is that correct?
It would be all three of the multifamily zones, yes.
Yes. Okay, great. And then on the parking, you talked about the number of parking spaces. Is that an equation to come up with the number of parking spaces per unit or per density? How does that number get arrived at?
Right, that's your existing zoning code, and it has a different parking ratio depending on how many bedrooms each unit has. And so then there's a calculation. It ranges from 1 parking space per unit for efficiencies in 1-bedroom units, I believe. At 2-bedroom units, I think it's 1.5, and then above that, it's 2. I hope I'm getting that right.
That's correct.
Those were my main questions.
Great, thank you. So I had a process question, because I suspect that a lot of work went into creating these odds and these guidelines, very specific guidelines. And so I'm curious, and it's touched upon in the memo, but I'm curious as to the process to put this together and the way in which the consultants worked with the town staff and with the design and review board. And just not a lengthy overview, but I think it'd be really helpful to understand the context and what went into this. And it gives me comfort as well to know more about that.
We had 2 meetings with the design review board. The first was to sort of talk in terms of what general objectives and how we could transition the hillside guidelines into objective standards. Some of the things that were important to them. This concept of green seams came up then. Again, that's the idea of trying to break up building mass with greenery in between, whether that's landscaping or pedestrian ways with paseos. And then the second meeting, we came back with some suggestions, a lot of which you see before you tonight, some of which were modified a bit. But yeah, so the DRB weighed in twice conceptually and then in more detail.
Terrific, thank you. And then would it be possible to go back to, I believe it's slide 2, it was part of Bob Brown's, his portion of the presentation as to why we are doing this. And it was very helpful, thank you. And I feel I have a good feeling from the staff memorandum of what has led up to this in terms of the decision-making among the commissions of the town. And what is in our housing element, and the fact that we do have a housing element that has been found to be in compliance with state law by HCD. Actually, you know what? I think it maybe go to the next slide. Yeah. The next one. So, no, you were there one before. Yes. And so I just wanted to, if I may, I actually just wanted to read them again and then sort of formulate the question.
And I can go into more detail. This is a really high level summary of a couple of very complex pieces of state law.
Yes, I can imagine. Well, I guess, one broad, a question that I have, I think many of us know that we have a timeline. We're working to meet state law requirements. We're working to meet certain timelines. And we've been asked, the housing element now kind of directs us to create these odds. What are the consequences of not adopting odds? Not just specific to site H, but just adopting odds generally.
That's one I'll pass to the town attorney.
So as a general response to your question of why do you need odds and what happens if you don't have them, Under the Housing Accountability Act, the town can only apply objective design and development standards to housing development projects. And that's, the housing development project is, includes 2 units or more, or is a mixed use project that is 2/3 residential. So the town is limited in applying only objective design and development standards. You have some in your existing zoning ordinance, but you don't have a lot of very specific objective standards. So many jurisdictions, most jurisdictions, if not all, in California have been going through the exercise of reviewing their existing standards and then developing and considering standards that are more objective. You're all familiar with some of the very subjective standards that have been in zoning ordinances for a very long time, including neighborhood compatibility, including, other similar types of issues. So I think, and Mr. Brown can speak to this at length too, because he's been engaged in developing these types of standards, to take subjective standards like neighborhood compatibility and try and make them more objective and in keeping with the town's feel and, desire for development moving forward.
Great, that's helpful. And if a developer were to come into an R3 zone and look and propose a project, what would they be faced? What would they be able to do or not do in the absence of odds? If that makes sense. I don't know if that question makes sense, but I'm trying to.
Well, say a
think of-
project came in, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I'm finished.
So if a project came in prior to the odds being in place, we would look through your existing standards, your standards in your zoning ordinance, your standards in any specific plans and in the general plan. And those standards which are objective would be applied to the project. One of the concepts behind having objective design and development standards is that someone can pick them up and compare their project to them and see if their project meets those standards. So I think Mr. Brown included a definition of what is an objective design and development standard, which in my kind of simplified way means you can look at it and you can know if your project meets that standard or not.
Okay, and so only the objective standards apply. You can only look to objective standards, the existence of objective standards sort of applicable to projects. And this may, just to clarify as well, there's a requirement to bring the zoning amendments into compliance with the housing element, is that?
Yes, so your zoning has to be consistent with your general plan. So as you all well know, the city just went through an extensive process to adopt a new general plan, including the adopted amended housing element. And we're now bringing forward some of the program implementation that's required under the housing element to bring your zoning ordinance into conformance with your housing element.
And if we don't do that, what happens?
Well, there's certain portions of the rezoning, for instance, the rezoning of Site H, that we're required to complete by January 31, 2024, because it's providing capacity for the town to meet its RHNA. As you know, and it's been mentioned a couple of times now tonight, the town did receive the determination from the State Department of Housing and Community Development that your housing element substantially complies with state law. Congratulations. And if you do not adopt the rezonings within the deadline, the statutory deadline, the town is at risk of having that certification revoked. There would be a process, I understand, that would be gone through before we would get to that remedy, but it is a remedy that's available to the state.
Great. Thank you so much for answering those sort of the varied questions that I had. Did that inspire any other questions?
Well, I'm curious, Mary, what happens in the event there was a revocation?
Well, the thing that comes first to mind is the town's, again, vulnerable, if you will, to a builder's remedy project, because you would no longer have an adopted certified housing element. There are maybe other ramifications that I are not coming immediately to mind, but that's the one that comes first.
So revocation is not just the end of that. It's that the builder's remedy then becomes available with respect to development. It's not as if development then at that point could not occur.
Potentially, I think that's correct. Yeah.
You were asked a question before, and I just want to make sure I understand this. So where you have, well, you know what, that goes to some questions as it relates to some of the red lines, so I'll wait for that, but that resolves in my mind. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Woodward.
No.
Okay, so I think if what I'd like to do is I think that concludes the questions, sort of those high level questions to substance and content. Open it up for public hearing, and then if this, Commissioner Sy, if this is an acceptable way forward, when we return for deliberation and we get into sort of some of the, unless they're, if these are sort of grammatical issues that you'd like to bring up, or, you know, I saw an additional use of the word was, if it's those types of, that type of conversation you'd like to have about the red lines, we can take that up at that time.
They're a little more substantive than that. They relate to kind of why certain things are framed the way they are. But again, I defer to the chair as far as.
Well, if it would help the public in terms of thinking through comments or adjusting comments, then I think we should do it now.
Okay, so I'll address a couple and to the chair, I'm happy to for others, depending upon what you think of my question. But one of my questions relates to page 8 of 39. So we've been talking, and this relates to the presentation a few minutes ago, to ultimately what we're talking about in terms of development of odds for R310 and including essentially R310 into this discussion. On page 8, under section 2, 16-21 .020 F as in Foxtrot, there is the proposed additional definition of R310, and then there's language there. My question is, and maybe it's directed to Mary in the first instance, or maybe Dina, is why does the language not track the language of what is in E echo R3? Right, and as you're thinking about my question, the reason I'm asking is because if we can be consistent, I'd like to be, which is why I asked my question, and I'm not sure why we're choosing a different way to define R310, given that it's essentially the same as R3, except it has the 10 dwellings per unit density issue.
Yeah, the intent was because of the minimum density. The housing element is trying to encourage, different housing types, more affordable housing types by design at a higher density. And so that's the reason for the language, instead of saying, it says suitable environment for more affordable residents in designated areas. So it's trying to bring in that concept of affordability at a higher minimum density than your R3 does now. So your R3 could be much larger units, et cetera. The R310 is trying to get at a bit higher density for more affordability.
Okay, okay, I understand that. Thank you. Is it strictly necessary for purposes of R310? That issue of affordability. I think what and the reason I ask that is because I'm trying to figure out how three-dimensional, if that makes sense, this needs to be versus two-dimensional. And by that, I mean specifically, if what we're talking about at R310 is literally the issue of density, normative judgments about affordability almost seems irrelevant to me. But again, I'm curious about your perspective.
I think we could track the first sentence the same as in R3, but I think the second sentence regarding the minimum 10 units per acre would need to stay.
Okay. That was one of my questions. So the other one is on the next page, page 9. This might be a little more ministerial, my question, but in 16-21.030 D as in Delta, you've got in number 2 there, the proposed addition of R310 and R4. Do you see that?
Hmm.
In the narrative part, it doesn't include the additional language R310, R4. In other words, it says all improvements proposed for the R3 zone, ... Seems to me, unless I'm misreading this, it should also include R310 and R4?
You're
No?
exactly right.
Okay.
And just, just so I'm tracking, if you don't mind, it took me a while to get to where you were. So you're looking at, this is page 9,
Page 9.
right? D2.
Subdivision D as in Delta 2. It says R310 and R4 as the red line additions, but in the
Right.
narrative, it doesn't actually
Got
add
it.
that, which is actually the important part. And so I think there's agreement by Bob
Yeah.
that that should have been there. Okay, it was
Okay.
Scrivener's
Right.
error. Thank you very much. And then my others are pretty
Okay, great.
minor in that regard. Thank you.
Commissioner Woodward, did you have anything along in this vein?
No, I did not. Nothing additional.
Okay, okay, thank you. That was very helpful. Okay, well, let's open this up for public comment. And so whoever would like to speak, who's present with us or on Zoom, we'll have 3 minutes. And we'll start with the people here with us tonight, and we'll ask folks to step up to the podium, state your name, tell us where you live, and make sure that says 3 minutes on the clock. We do have a lot of people here tonight, so we will really ask you to keep those comments to within 3 minutes so that everyone has a chance to speak. And of course, it's very helpful to us to keep things sort of really focused on what's before us tonight. It's not prohibited from talking about other things, but it just helps everyone get in very valuable comments. Anyone?
Yeah. Anyway, my name's Scott Miller. I've been here multiple times. I live on Jamaica Street, Paradise K down the street. And my previous concerns were about safety. I've seen multiple wrecks, severe accidents, kids going to school. There's another one just last week. That's going to be horrendously made worse by this development. But there's going to be a presentation on side J, which I think would be a vastly improved option. And if you're saying that you don't have enough time, they probably said that about clear cutting the redwoods too. I mean, this is an important cove on San Francisco Bay. It's time for serious consideration, because once it's there, you can't undo it. 100, this year we were talking about going from 2 cows to 3 cows in a beehive. Now we're talking about 144 units on one of the last coves on Paradise K. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And we honestly thought you were talking about housing. So we went out and talked about ADUs. And you can't count your ADUs in Paradise K because you don't technically fit into but you're going through backflips to rezone, to make this corporation be able to make huge profits. But we can't build the ADUs for the people who need the housing. I thought we were talking about housing. You guys misled us. I think you should be ashamed of yourself. That's all I can say. Once this goes in, it's never coming out. Just like the redwoods get cleared. This cove is beautiful. Have you ever been there? Have you ever walked there? Have you ever watched the tide come in? Have you ever listened to the owls hoot at night and the egrets? It's beautiful. And it's going for profit. Pisses me off.
Thank you. So thank you for your comments. And just to keep things moving, we appreciate the passion in the room, but we typically we ask folks not to respond to comments with applause. I should say that Commissioner Stein, I did listen to the presentation today for 30 minutes about Site J. If we're talking about the same presentation, we'll find out soon.
Hi, good evening. My name is Stuart Scheinholz. I also live in the K. I am a lawyer and have been a developer in the past. So I do have some experience in this, and I'm just not another NIMBY. I've lived in the K for about 15 years. I want to discuss a couple numbers with you. I travel on Paradise Drive, let's call it every day, back and forth, times 15 years, times 365 days. That's 10,950 times I've been on Paradise Drive. I don't know how often you come by our neighborhood or how often you're around Site H, but I have a lot of experience on that road. I can tell you that the one thing that is paramount is I don't want to smash into a cyclist or the occasional pedestrian. Now I want you to imagine concrete trucks, steel trucks, lumber trucks, workers, consultants going back and forth on Paradise Drive for a couple of years to build this monstrosity. Now let's take the 140 units times the 1.5 cars per unit that was just described. That's 210 more cars that are somehow going to be going in and out of that steep slope on Paradise Drive, the curvy street where you can't, you don't know what's around the next corner. So that's one number that I think we should talk about. The other number I want to talk about is the concept of a rezoning from, say, retail that's defunct to residential. Great idea. How about a lot split where someone has one lot and it's for single family home and we divide it so it'll accommodate 4 homes? Also understandable. What you're talking about is taking a site, a 10-acre site, and now you're going to put a multiple of 25 onto the site. So currently will accommodate, I think, 4 or 5 homes. 25 times 4 is 100. If you go to 140 units, now we're talking a multiple of 35 times. So I'd like to know how often in the past, if there's any precedent for the town to do this kind of upzone. It seems crazy to me. I understand the town's desire to satisfy the state. I know it's a big deal, but that doesn't mean that they should willy-nilly choose an inferior site. It makes absolutely no sense. There are 450 homes that are north of Trestle Glen that are going to be adversely affected by this. And if you talk to those homeowners, you're going to find they are adamantly against it. We've been to the town council meetings. They give us the Heisman. It's ridiculous. I don't think our views have been heard, and I think this is a terrible idea. Just because the town needs it doesn't mean that this is the right site. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brian McPeak. I live at 7 Seaforth Place in the development referred to as Seaforth Estates. I'm here on behalf of 30 homeowners who many of whom would have liked to have been here tonight, but on short notice weren't able to make it. I think we just want to lodge our strong objection to the use or suggestion of Site J as an alternative to Site H. We very much acknowledge and empathize with many of the concerns around Site H, but in our view, Site J presents all the same issues, only in a more acute fashion. The stretch of Paradise Drive is less developed, has all the same concerns around safety and traffic. The slope for Site J is even steeper than that at Site H. There's been very little environmental work done. Streams, wetlands, already sort of landslide deposits in the area. So while we very much appreciate some of the reservations about including Site H in the plan, Site J is not a viable alternative, and we wanted to make sure our objection was heard by the commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next. I'm surprised there's no applause.
Hi, my name is Patricia Mayer. My husband Don Martin and I live at 4695 Paradise Drive, about 2 blocks away, the way the crow flies from this Site H. We've owned our property there for 36 years, and I'm really familiar with the traffic and the conditions of Paradise Drive Road. I mean, this started out as a mountain road for access by just a few homes when it was first developed. It's extremely narrow. There are areas where you go over the white line and you're down 80 or 100 feet into the K in somebody's backyard. I counted the number of curves. There's like at least 26, 27 blind curves from the fire station where you go onto Trestle Glen, and then to the north, lots of people want to go to the north because it's the shopping centers, it's Corte Madera, it's San Rafael. So these homes that are going to be proposed to be built, all these people need to either go north or south. That's the only way out of there. They have to go on Paradise Drive. They've got to go around these 26, 27 blind curves, either north or south. And, you know, we've had lots of accidents there. We've had buses go down into the cave. We've had people killed and maimed and injured. And, you know, does the council and the people of Tiburon want the blood on their hands by adding to the danger on that road? I mean, it's already like, now we have just tons of bicyclists. They all love it. You know, they want to come over there on the weekend. They cycle all through the week, but especially the weekends, you'll see big groups in them, 20, 30 people. And then you got the folks that want to get behind them and they want to go and they want to pass and they'll risk it and they'll go around that corner and you got them coming at you and you got two options. Either you go into the hill, into the ditch if you're on the west lane, and if you're on the east lane, you're going to go down into the cave if you can't get out of their way. And there are areas where there's no place to get out of their way. And so that's our main concern, is the danger to the road, the addition of the traffic, the pollution, the air pollution, the noise. It's just such a bad idea. I mean, I'm totally behind also the visual concerns of developing a beautiful site, as the first speaker mentioned, and the wildlife and all that. But my focus tonight was the roadway, and I just want to read the vision and guiding principles of the Tiburon General Plan circulation element. The circulation element has to do with roadways. The town of Tiburon envisions a transportation system that supports the town's goals for safe and healthy transportation, sustainability, a sense of small town community character, a high quality of life for residents. Where did that all go?
Would you mind telling me your name again? I just missed it.
Oh,
I wanted to
it's
put it in my notes.
Patricia, last name is Mayer, M-A-I-E-R.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I presented my letter to the town that essentially
Okay.
covers some of these
Thank
points.
you. Thank you so much.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Jim Golub, Gollub. I've been a resident in this neighborhood in Paradise Cave for 30 years. I think many of us met when I was directing the economic strategy for Marin County last year. I think we had 15 focus groups. And what you're attempting to do here makes perfect sense in the aggregate, but speaking as an economic therapist, which is what I've done globally for 45 years, I want to emphasize the opportunity of collaborative solutions without considering the fact when we have let's call it a local landowner who has a large amount of property that this gentleman is willing to put up for this, let's call it, to meet the housing needs, and in fact donate 10 acres of land on top of that portion of this property. Let's put it this way. It creates the opportunity for a deal, a transaction, and a socially conscious outcome that could be very attractive. And I've dealt with, let's call it, collaborative strategies for places like Hong Kong, Bangalore, India, Silicon Valley. And what's interesting about dynamic but successful communities is their flexibility, not ignoring things, but to do what we call due diligence and collaboration to leverage these assets. So you have a 21-acre piece of land, which you could leverage, you could get 10 acres for free out of that package, and a lot of other problems resolved. I'm not trying to criticize what you've been doing on the other case, but I know that you've heard from these other folks about the strategic importance of safety and doing due diligence on that property. And I do due diligence on other things all the time. So my wish, my encouragement, I'm speaking as someone who knows community problem solving. You know, I have degrees in urban planning. I was chairman of the Housing Commission of Menlo Park for 8 years. I've helped resolve very complicated issues, but with the heart of those issues is the willingness to actually think fresh, think collaborative, but focus on the solution, not complaints, but resolving the issues with a higher value added for all parties. And I'd be glad to be of assistance if I can in any way, but you know, I'm not sure if you got a chance to look at the Marin economic strategy that we concocted, with a lot of input from the bottom up with top-down analytics. It emphasizes what you're trying to do here. It encourages communities to think creatively about how to have higher density housing. It says you must have this to generate your next generation economy. So again, speaking as your economic therapist or formerly, I just want to really, really strongly encourage you to do not only due diligence on the site, walk it through, see the safety hazards of many kinds that could be there, but also look at the upside, because you could get it with the talents that you have in this room and other people, they would align themselves to help accelerate the development objectives you have from the merge, what's the word? I'm blank on the two, what do you
Oh,
call
I'm
it?
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I lost track of the time. Thank you. I'll ask just one more time if we could just refrain. I think we know that that many people here are very much in support of the positions that have been communicated. We appreciate that very much, but I'm just respectfully asking if we could just sort of follow the normal process. Yes.
Thank you. My name is David Parkinson. I've been a Paradise K resident for 38 years. My family has grown up in this area. We've biked and hiked and walked Paradise K to school, going to school, my kids when they miss the bus, me when I'm exercising, training for a marathon or 2 or 3 or 4, biking, getting to the mall, or getting to the Goodyear place to drop my car off. I want to tell you something. This is just the worst thing that could happen to that area. I mean, you've got a jewel and you can't get to it because the problem here is it's a great presentation. The fact is, you can't get to it safely. If you increase the workload of that Paradise Drive, which I have been run off the road before on my bike and training for a marathon, run off the road by cars because there's no shoulder. There's nowhere to go. We would be turning, if you put 95 to 140 spots, homes in there, new homes, in Paradise Drive, this would become H-bomb Drive because it would be a nightmare for anybody in that facility, in that new community, and also all the people that are using that road right now. And when the sun is wrong and you come around a corner, you cannot see. You can't see. It's just so narrow and so dangerous and so troublesome. Walk and bike and hike on that road with this number of workload, what a workload is going on to after this gets through, and getting it through is going to be a problem. I wish you would consider all the people in this room and all the people that live on Paradise Drive and all the people that may move there if this goes through. I wish you would consider us and our well-being and our safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to thank you for the report. Thank you for listening to us. Nice to speak with you earlier today. We just wanted to share with the rest of the group a couple.
Did you
Oh,
state your name?
Yes, my name is Tom Strutman. Thank you. Just a couple slides I'd like to look at. First is I can hold this up. Do I need to be at the microphone?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay, so
You can
we've been
actually,
here.
sir, you can actually carry that microphone with you. It
Ah.
comes out of the stand. I just need to have the recording. Thank you.
Right, okay, just so everyone can see, we've done some research about the streams. And the streams are located here. There's 4 of them and the town has a requirement that you need to be building 100 feet away from these streams. So I think building here, your presentation was very good, but it doesn't look very possible that could happen and still meet the requirements of the town with a 100-foot setback. So if we look at the 100-foot setback and layer over the streams, you can see there's only a few places where you could build. And if you wanted to build the number of units that you're talking about, you would need to put them in just like 4 places. So you wouldn't get very many units at 3 stories. You'd need more like 14. So it doesn't seem like it's a viable site. Thank you.
So why don't you, did you have anything more? Because you'll be a new speaker, so you can have 3 minutes. Yeah.
I didn't have anything more. I know everyone's working very hard. We're just really frustrated and we have challenges with safety. Safety is a huge issue and it's been spoken to before, but I'm the president of the Homeowners Association and represent the 240 homes in Paradise K and about 400 people. And we're concerned about the safety of adding that level of density. And I travel that road a lot and yeah, I mean, almost every single time there's a cyclist there. So you have to wait. If you're in a hurry, someone pulls out, it's very dangerous. It's not set up to have a lot of traffic. And it's would probably be pretty expensive to put an extra lane on that entire road if you could even do it. So it's just the safety is a big issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Reset why don't we reset? Yeah, there we go. Okay, do you want to stand up with the mic?
Yes, thank you. I would. I'm John Larson. Hello again. And good to see you. They gave us a half hour of their time today. Thank you very much. I'm one of the co-managers of the committee for Tiburon. We have 150 individuals, 75 households, at least, who represent 440 households north of Trestle Glen. I've lived here and moved here in 75. Mateo Drive is right above the site H there, so we're very concerned. I'm also speaking for Old Landing homeowners. Pellegrinelli Drive is near us, Mateo Drive, and of course the K is well represented. And we have 440 homes on our mailing list that we're in contact, and so we're sharing their concerns as well as what you're hearing here tonight. So thank you very much. I'm just once again our low-tech presentation here, but we have sent this to the Planning Commission members. It's lots and lots of detail. This is a summary tonight again, and what we're just showing here is at the top pink there. I apologize. Is site H? It's 10 acres, and if you can see what's down here in green, there is what we call site J. It's owned by Mr. Winters, Marty Winters, who is a former mayor of Belvedere, a great friend of Tiburon. And we're working with him now. He's back in town. He's very anxious to have his 27 acres considered as a possible substitute for site H. It is, let me just summarize, there's 15 at least advantages. I'll try to go through a quick of them in my minute here. With the alluvial streams that prevent building on site H, there's 10 to 12 acres that have no streams. So there's a solid building site for up to 140 units on good solid ground. The big views up there are absolutely beautiful. Big difference. We're on the 8-inch water supply, which has our engineering firm tells us more than enough water to handle. Whereas site H is on a 6-inch main. There's not enough water to serve 93 units, much less the units that are there right now. And site J will also be on the Tiburon's sanitary sewer, 5 instead of Corte Madera. The big advantage, I think, site J, it does not touch the bay. As you know, site H is on the bay where we have to deal with BCDC, the birds are the fish, the marsh, in addition to the stream. So the beautiful thing about J is that it's up high and has no problems, no stream problems, and no big problems. So I think, oh my gosh, I'm just out. So I have 10 more advantages. I've submitted it in a document that we can make available, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank you.
one last one here.
I'll give you, I'll give you 15, about
15
15, 20
seconds.
seconds. We have technological issues.
Site J, here is the Tiburon, that's the fire department right there. This is Paradise Drive along here. And as you can see, besides 10 acres of open space, Seaford right down here, guaranteed 10 acres of open space above you. So that's a big plus for Seaford. And the main thing is one access road from Trestle Glen, no traffic on Paradise Drive, north or south. The entrance is right across from the fire station. So there are many advantages. Also, I'll note that the town has
Thank you
already
so much. Thank you.
14 homes are going in right below it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name
Hi
is
there.
Jeff Mosley. I've lived in Paradise Cave for 45 years. And
What was your last name?
Mosley,
Mosley.
Moseley. I'm not going to belabor any of the salient points that these gentlemen just brilliantly laid out. It's obvious that the proposed density, in my opinion, and our opinion, is ludicrous. But what I was going to try to point out to the commission is the credibility that you'll have with the state in the event that you propose this site. The Denova Group obviously had some comments regarding the mitigation of the ephemeral streams on the site that, in my opinion, were laughable. I feel that once the state sees the CSW Stuber-Stroh comments and research, they'll throw that stuff right out the window. Obviously, you're the lead agency in this situation. However, you're going to be dealing with this on this site with BCDC. You have a massive riparian shoreline there. And I just can't imagine that they would ever allow anything like this that is proposed to happen there. And then you compound that with these streams, with these setbacks, you're going to have the tiniest footprint possible, like Mr. Strutman mentioned, who was our HOA president. You can't build over 35 feet. Once the state sees this, they're going to just kick this into the garbage can and be probably pretty aggravated. That would be my opinion. I really highly recommend and suggest that you strongly look at the winter site as an alternative. It's a far more viable option. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Paula Coven. I live in Paradise Cay. Prior to that, I lived in the main part of Tiburon. So I've been a Tiburon resident for over 20-something years with my husband, Rick. A lot of things have been brought up that are relevant to us that we think are really important. That no one ever mentions being on a boat. We kayak by that cove a lot. It's stunning. And we think to ourselves, they want to put something right up there in that tiny little space where all the green is. How is that even possible? So that seems crazy to me. The traffic has already been spoken about over and over and over. I keep finding myself having questions though, because it was my understanding that all of this is because we need affordable housing. What are the rents of these places? And at first I heard there were going to be 90-something units. So that meant 2 cars per unit, which is another 180-something cars spilling out onto our tiny little road. But then I recently read something, perhaps we'll add an additional, I can't remember what the number was, 20-something, 40-something units of affordable house, or not affordable. They didn't call it that. They called it, what was it? It was something, something that had to do with not as high a rent, I guess, as what they would really probably be able to get. And because this is a really beautiful view, I'm assuming these are going to be high rent units. And so maybe some of the other ones will be slightly less high rent units, but are they for teachers? Are they affordable for people who work in town? Because isn't that the point of all that? That's my understanding, and I don't really believe, and maybe I'm incorrect, but I somehow don't believe that that's what's going to happen. So that's a concern for me. How many streets, how many tributaries? You showed all these images, and I thought they must be talking about some other part of town, not the part we're talking about. This is a tiny little area. Where are the roads? How many roads are going to go up to Paradise Drive? And the last thing I'll say with my minute, there is no bus line. There is no public transportation on that road. So we're talking cars and cars and more cars, which is a pretty terrifying road to drive on anyway. When my daughter turned 16, I was horrified that she was going to go off one of the edges. So those are all the concerns that I have besides just the lack of beauty.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi there, my name is Eric Zeck. I was born and raised here in Southern Marin. I've been in various spots here in Tiburon for well over 20 years now, most recently in Paradise Cay. My kids have gone to school here in Tiburon and just recently became empty nesters. When someone first told me about this project and I found out about it pretty late, I don't feel like there was a lot of communication in general in terms of changing it from Marin to Tiburon and all that. But I literally thought it was an April Fool's joke. And when I walked along that site, I'm like, how could they, one, ever build anything there? And why would they? And it's such a beautiful spot. I walk by it, I boat by it. And I just think for a town that prides itself on being beautiful in views and being environmental, I think it would be a travesty to do anything on this site. But probably more importantly, just a couple months ago, my youngest son got in a very serious car crash on Paradise Drive around a blind corner. Another driver pulled out in this blind spot and they crashed, and it was very serious. Fortunately, they were both in big vehicles and they were able to walk away from it. But that happens all the time. You don't hear about it. It's not publicized, but there's accidents out there constantly. We had another friend whose son drove off the edge on a sharp corner along Paradise Drive and almost died. So that, I mean, the safety there is crazy. I mean, we almost decided not to move there because we knew it was already so dangerous with the number of cars, the bicyclists and everything else. So I really, really urge you to consider doing something else here, because I guarantee you bad things will happen if a big development goes in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
Ross Martin. I'm also a resident of Paradise Cay. I obviously agree with everything these folks have said. But tonight, I think you guys are also taking into consideration the odds that have been developed, right? So it seems to me that some of these odds are just kind of favoring what the owner of this site wants to do here. So there's the one section that you described earlier where you go, if it's a 10-acre lot, you have to be 100 set back from these streams. But if you're a 5-acre lot, you only have to be 50 feet. So why does the environmental look at that change? So he could just divide this lot into two and have more space to build on, right? And be closer to these streams. So that's an advantage to the, whoever built on this site. And then two, what you pointed out earlier, Jeff, that they put this extra language in about affordable residences. And my understanding from the state is if you have affordable residences, you can have more units on the property. So these two things just didn't sit well with me, and they don't seem like they should be here in favor of this owner and his ability to develop more units and make more money. So I just want to bring those 2 points up. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Natasha Minty. I'm on Trinidad Drive in Paradise Cay. I just have one question. I was wondering if anyone has actually visited the site.
Yeah, so we've we don't normally do Q&A, but we have been to the site several times. This has been before us many times over the last few years. So I think we've all been to the site a number of times. So.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yes.
My name is Vicky Hughes. I live at 9-5 Trinidad Drive in Paradise Cay. And I have a view right up this ravine that we're talking about. And it is a ravine. As a matter of fact, it's a drainage ravine. And I walk Paradise Drive 2 or 3 times a week. I've been at 9-5 Trinidad Drive 35 years. This last winter, the drainage off of the Ring Mountain watershed was tremendous. It eroded underneath Paradise Drive. It eroded down into this drainage ravine we're talking about. If you walk Paradise Drive along there, it drops off between 4 and 12 feet right from the highway, right from Paradise Drive. In the last couple of years, because of insurance requirements, all of the Ring Mountain side there, including Mateo Drive, has been cleaned off of trees, shrubs, planting in order to create safety for fires. But it's also created even more drainage problems because there are no plants that catch the drainage from Ring Mountain. It's tremendous, that mountain. If you look up from Paradise Drive from there, there is no more foliage, just some trees that have been trimmed up. Nothing is absorbing the rain. And because of climate change, we're going to have more large storms. And it's going to degrade underneath Paradise Cay. And the ravine has already had huge drainage problems this year. We have looked down at the bottom of that drainage ravine for 35 years. And there's bricks and debris and dirt that have come down in the last 2 or 3 years. It's tremendous. They're going to take all of those eucalyptus trees out because they are a huge fire hazard. Again, in the drainage ravine, there'll be no moisture that it's going to be absorbed. There are not only just streams going down in that ravine, there are springs. And the elevation from the Paradise Drive down into that ravine where you're going to put 90 dwellings, if there's a fire and those people want to get out, it's going to be just like Lahaina on Maui. People are going to burn to death in their cars trying to get up on Paradise Drive.
Thank you. Anyone else who wishes to speak? So it looks like we don't have anyone else here in the audience, but let's go online on Zoom.
Chair Williams, at this point, I have one hand raised and I'm going to turn on the audio for Peter Prowse. I apologize if I said that wrong.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. This is Peter Prowse. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, planning commissioners and staff, for accommodating me on Zoom this evening. I'm an attorney for the committee for Tiburon. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. You are the planning commission. The town's ordinances make you the town's planning agency. Your job, the job you've been entrusted to do by this community, is sound planning for Tiburon's well-being. You're being asked today to recommend a rezoning of Site H to require a minimum of 10 units per acre, a minimum. That minimum would make the current largely open space use of this site illegal. You'd be recommending requiring that a slice of paradise be paved over for housing of a type and size that Tiburon has never seen before. You'd also be creating a new conflict with the general plan policies that require a 100-foot buffer around streams and wetlands by allowing a new exception to that policy that would allow buffers as little as 25 feet if a biologist deems that adequate. That's nowhere in the general plan, that new exception. That's a new environmental impact, a new potentially significant environmental impact that requires environmental review. In order to make this recommendation to rezone Site H, you're also being asked to find that this rezoning is necessary for the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare of Tiburon. That's in the resolution you're being asked to approve. Do you really think, as the Planning Commission, as planning professionals who are entrusted with important responsibility by this community, that this density is necessary for Tiburon's public health, safety, and welfare? What problem are you trying to solve? What public health, safety, and welfare problem would paving over Site H solve? The only problem I've heard that you're trying to avoid is a potential builder's remedy application. This is not about affordable housing. These will be market rate units with bay views. These will cost 7 figures each. You don't need to rezone this site to this density to avoid the builder's remedy. There are alternatives, including ADUs, that will provide that missing middle housing that you still have time to explore and approve, which are teed up to you already. The town supports ADU alternatives. You aren't as backed into a corner as your staff and attorney would have you believe. If you do not believe in good conscience, as this community's planning commission, that rezoning this site is necessary for Tiburon's public health, safety, and welfare, then don't put your names to this resolution. We'll work with you on alternatives that will work for Tiburon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
I do have another hand raised. Give me just one moment.
Sure.
A second timer. I'm now going to promote to panelist Mary Hayden.
Thank you. Mary, are you with us?
She's rejoining. It'll be just a
Oh,
moment.
okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I have serious concerns about the potential increase in traffic that the forthcoming housing project is introducing to Tiburon Boulevard. The current situation is already quite challenging with the one-way traffic, particularly during school hours. The boulevard is backed up from 2:30 to 5 every day, and that's not talking about construction goes on there. I have serious concerns about adding more housing, especially during a major disaster on that one-way traffic road. I respectfully request that the Planning Commission thoroughly assess the potential impact of this new housing development in the boulevard, on the boulevard condition traffic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Chair Williams, I have no more hands raised.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you all for your comments tonight. I'm going to close the public hearing comment portion of the agenda and bring it back to the commission for us to discuss and deliberate, maybe seek clarification from staff if we have questions after listening to comment. So I'm closing the public hearing and returning to commissioners to understand and discuss our thoughts on this item.
I think it's putting an exception for that policy.
Commissioner Sai, did you?
I can address.
Oh, and also you had some comments that related to the red lines as well. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to.
Yeah, I have a couple of actually maybe just a couple of ministerial things. Back on page 9 of the proposed amendments, this is 1621.030D Delta. we redlined out the word "a" when talking about subject to approval, and this is in D1, by the way, subject to approval of, and then the part that's redlined out is a conditional use permit, and instead it's been replaced as shall be subject to approval of site plan and architectural review. Those words don't make sense. I mean, just as syntax wise, they don't make sense to me. I think what we're saying is that it's subject to site plan and architectural review, no?
It's subject to approval of a site plan architectural review process, which you've defined in your code, yes.
Well, the word process is not there, so that's one.
Okay.
So it just, so as written right now, if you were to adopt the red lines, it doesn't make sense. If you added the word process, it might, assuming that what we're talking about is, but even honestly, even then that doesn't quite make sense. And trust me, I live in a world of legalese, but this literally doesn't make sense to me, because if what we're trying to say here in this phrase is there needs to be site plan and architectural review, and that review needs to yield a certain result, we can say that, but even if we added the word process, all you're talking about is approval of a process. And I'm not quite sure if that's what you're saying.
Sort of. I want to be sure. I'm not-
Thank you, Chair Williams, members of the commission. So I think I hear you. That is what you call the design review board process. It's called what's called site plan and architectural review. And that's why we reference code section 16-52.20, because that's where that process is laid out. So you don't call it design review, as some jurisdictions do. You call it site plan and architectural review.
I'm going to take us down a rabbit hole, and I'm not trying to, so I'm trying to avoid it, but I understand that, and I can appreciate that it's a term of art, and is what you're saying, but the review or the review process is exactly that. It's a process, right? And by the way, the review or the review process could yield two different results, right? Unless I'm wrong. One result is you've successfully passed that review. The second result is that you have unsuccessfully passed that review. In other words, you have not passed that review. Yeah.
Understood. Perhaps if we look at 1652.020, we can find the right word for what approval is required. Because I do understand what you're saying. So if you give us a second to pull that up, we can come back.
And the solution to that, thank you, Mary. And the solution might be to just track the language. And by the way, to even simplify it further, it might be subject to approval set forth in section 16-52.020 parentheses, site plan and architectural review, parentheses. That would be
Or
pretty clean.
as set forth.
That would be pretty clean. I'm very much in favor of less words if we can. Although my comments don't necessarily suggest that.
I did trip over that language. I highlighted that language as well. So it's ambiguous.
If I may, Commissioner Williams, members of the commission.
Yes.
Perhaps one way to do it is to say approval of the design review board pursuant to section 1652.020.
Yeah, I'm totally okay with that. That makes more sense to me. And that would apply. I mentioned D1, but it's obviously applicable to D2 as well.
So I think if this makes sense, I would say subject to approval of the design review board as provided in section 1652.020, and then keep the parentheses site plan and architectural review.
I think that makes good sense.
Also work on appeal. It's not the DRB at that point.
So, okay, so that.
Appeal, because it's not the DRB at that point. I'm just saying if we state the board. but-
Apologies, commissioners.
Is there
I
a
think
concern about that we shouldn't reference the specific board itself?
There's a concern to make sure that we include any appeals in that process. So if you will, we understand the issue. And I know this commission likes to see the actual words that you're recommending. But I think we get the direction.
I think you do. I think you do too. I'm comfortable with that. I think you, thank you for indulging that. I have a substantive question as it relates to the essence of R310, which is a minimum of 10.0 dwelling units per acre. There was a public comment that related to, it's actually a pretty interesting comment to me because I don't know the answer to it. If hypothetically speaking, you have on site H the ability to subdivide that land, what does that do? And I suppose there are many different scenarios here, but I'm curious what that does with respect to how R310 is being proposed, because you've got both a requirement of 10 dwelling units per acre. You've got, as referenced, I think by at least a few public comments, and it's been referenced before, issues of setbacks as it relates to the different streams. And perhaps, Bob, you're the best person to speak to it. But if you understand the comment / question I'm asking, do you mind commenting about that?
Sure. Dividing a site that, let's just say is roughly 10 acres. A couple things would happen. One is if you put a dividing property line, you've now created setbacks on all four sides of both lots, right? So you've increased the interior setbacks between those two new lots on the lot line. And the second thing is, yes, the policy conservation element C9 is written, it's already adopted in the general plan. It's written in such a way that if you get your lot size down below 5 acres, then yes, the stream setback goes from 100 feet to 50 feet. So that would be another result of subdividing a lot that's, let's say, around 10 acres into two lots that are less than 5 acres each.
So, and that change you're talking about is actually not a change, but it's in the general plan as it relates to 5 acres versus 10. Why is there a difference in terms of a 50-foot versus 100-foot? Why does that exist, 5 acres versus 10?
I think it's primarily because on a larger site, you have more flexibility in terms of how to locate and where to locate development. As the site gets smaller and smaller, a developer is more constrained as to where he would be able to put buildings. And so as a result, a smaller setback. And I've seen many zoning codes that have stream setbacks. 100 feet is typically large. I would say 50 feet is probably the most common dimension that I typically see in cities and towns that do have a stream setback established.
And with respect to the broad issue that I raised, and again, it was inspired by a comment I had heard in the public comment. It's a somewhat general question, and maybe it's best for Dina, and if it's too hypothetical, just let me know. With respect to site H as it exists today, are there any restrictions that relate to the owner's ability to subdivide that land? And maybe the answer is no. I don't know the answer to that question.
He could subdivide the property currently. There's nothing that prohibits him from doing that.
Okay. Last question, Bob, it's kind of back to you. It relates to what I was asking about the 10 dwelling units per acre. I know it's set forth much like R4 is set forth as a minimum, or a minimum and maximum, but a minimum in this case. Why is there a minimum? And this would be applicable, I admit, to R4 too, but we're talking about R310. So can you speak to that?
It relates to state housing element law. So the Reed School site, vacant portion, which is zoned R4, is designated as a site for affordable housing units, low income and very low income units. And so in that case, the state requires that a minimum density of 20 units be established in order to qualify that site in your housing element. And in the case of the site H, it is designated for moderate income households. And so the applicable minimum zoning is for 10 units per acre in that case.
Okay, so those are, I think, at least as of now, kind of the bulk of what I think were pretty, just for me, my substantive questions that I had. I want to go back to an issue that I think that I asked about before, but someone asked about it before, that relates to what we're trying to accomplish tonight. And I want to tether ourselves to that in the first instance, although I went a little afield beyond that. So there was a question that was asked, now that I'm thinking about it. I think it was the chair who asked a question, Mary, to you as it relates to what happens if odds are not approved. And I want to try to ask the same question a slightly different way, because Mary, I don't know whether the question was answered, at least in my mind. So as I want to first think through the consequences of what the planning commission is being asked to recommend or not recommend as it relates to the town council, and specifically tonight as it relates to the potential adoption or recommendation for adoption of odds regulations. I want you to speak to us about, hypothetically speaking, and I'm asking a lawyer to do the things she hates to do, which is to speak hypothetically. But in the event that odds are not approved, forget the planning commission for a moment, but in the event that odds are not adopted by the town council, what is the immediate next, and I want to take it in stages if I can briefly, what is the immediate next result for not having odds? Is it what you described before as the builder's remedy in the absence of odds?
So the builder's remedy right now doesn't apply in the town of Tiburon.
It does not, correct.
Because you have an adopted and certified housing element. If the town doesn't adopt the zonings that are required to provide the capacity, and you'll recall that program HLL was revised in response to comments raised by HCD that they wanted to ensure that the objective design and development standards for Site H allow for development at the capacity that's identified in your inventory, so the 93 units. If those rezonings are not accomplished, there's a potential that your certification could be revoked. There are also other remedies that HCD can pursue, and we didn't get into that, depth of losing complete zoning control, the AG perhaps bringing a suit against the town, because those are remedies that ratchet up. There are provisions in the Housing Accountability Act that indicate that if a site is zoned for lower income housing in your site's inventory, which this site is not, that projects that come in on those sites, even before you adopt your zoning, have to be allowed under the Housing Accountability Act if they include 20% affordable to low or 100% affordable to mod. And I think that I want to clarify that that isn't applicable to Site H because it's being utilized for above mod capacity.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that? I just missed that last point about.
Sure, and I know this is a lot, so.
I know, yeah. I was taking notes.
Under the Housing Accountability Act.
Right. No, you don't have to repeat the whole thing, just that last point.
If you don't mind, I
Sure.
think it's important to put it into context. So sites on your site's inventory that are being utilized to accommodate lower income RHNA.
Right.
Before you adopt your rezoning, those sites could come in with a project. There could be a project on those sites that include 20% affordable to lower income households or 100% to mod. And you cannot deny those projects. Those are allowed to come forward even before your zoning is in place. That does not apply to the zoning that's in front of you tonight related to Site H because it's being utilized to provide capacity for your above moderate income.
If we were to rezone it, if we did rezone tonight,
Well,
Site H.
It's identified in your
That's
housing
before us,
element and the land use element as a site that's available for
Right.
higher density.
Okay, I'm just trying to really wrap my brain around that's the legalistic explanation, which is, but what I'm just trying to, are you saying that, so we're being asked not just to adopt odds for three different zones, R3, R4, and R310. We're also being asked to rezone Site H to become R310. So we could conceivably adopt odds, just not rezone that particular, that site. And that site is not rezoned. It doesn't have odds. I'm trying to understand. Yes, Bob Brown, help me.
I would just like to make the point that in adopting the general plan, the council already did adopt the land use map that designates site H as higher density multifamily. So that's already done. So lacking the adoption of the R310 zoning for that site, your general plan and your zoning map will not be in compliance. They will not be consistent.
So that's what we talked about at the
Yeah.
top is we're out of compliance. By being out of compliance,
Well, I don't know that compliance is the right word. That's just respectfully, that's just my opinion. It actually might be the right word. I just don't know that that's the right word. To me, because I went through this same mental gymnastics earlier today in the past few days thinking about this. What Bob's saying is very important because how we get to the question ultimately of rezoning site H is almost kind of we almost back into the question. And the reason we back into it is because of what Bob said, is that the issue of site H's inclusion in terms of it changing what it is today or yesterday, whatever you want to call it, is the fact that it's in the now changed and adopted map. Bob, yeah? Okay. So, but the issue of compliance to me is important, and I stand corrected if I need to be corrected, by the way, is because what we're talking about is inconsistency. And inconsistency potentially, and this was where I had my question to Mary, but I'm glad the chair asked her question, is the inconsistency I think would result in, but I want to be corrected if I'm wrong about this. The inconsistency is that we've got a map that the town council, the town council elected by the voters of Tiburon have adopted, including site H. If that's not zoned to be R310, then functionally speaking, site H couldn't be built to be moderate housing. Absent, Mary, the question, sorry, the question I was asking you, which is, it couldn't be built absent some other function of state law that would otherwise by default allow it to happen. It's a statement, but it's really more of a question. That's what I'm trying
and
to.
is that where the affordable housing piece comes in? That was my question I didn't understand the ramifications of what you were saying about what could be allowed in certain instances. What does that subject us to as a town in terms of development? You've already stated that if there's an inconsistency, that risks revocation of HCD's revocation of the certification of the housing element.
Right.
Correct?
Yes,
And
I
some
think that's
other other remedies that HCD has
that
that
HCD.
ramp up to, actions by the AG, losing zoning control altogether. There's a bunch of remedies in the housing law that gives HCD a lot of enforcement authority. But the question you're asking me is, okay, our land use map says this is a high density zoning or high density site. Our housing element says that this is going to be rezoned for high density housing. What if we don't do that? And could a project come in tomorrow and force us to change that zoning? The answer is without the affordable component, the HAA, the Housing Accountability Act, doesn't apply. And what a developer or an owner would do, I'm not sure. My guess is they would come in and try and force your hand to do the rezoning and or complain to HCD that you haven't done the rezoning in a timely fashion and bring some other pressure to bear on the town. But as you have indicated, what you're being asked to do tonight is make a recommendation to the town council on the implementation of the programs in the housing element to rezone site H as the town council has determined to keep it in the housing element and to adopt the odds and furtherance of the programs in the housing element.
And just to clarify, because we're jumping around a lot on these different things. So when we talk about without the affordability component, you're specifically saying that for site H, it's zoned, it's not an R4, and the R4 is the affordability component. So that if somebody came in today and said on the Reed School, they wanted to build something with the affordability component in it, but there is no option for them to come in today and propose an affordability component under current zoning standards.
I don't believe the Reed School site is utilized to provide capacity for lower income, Rena, but we can double check that for you.
I'm specifically, sorry if I got that wrong. Again, we answer one question, we want to do like 3 more questions before we actually get a chance to resolve it. So the real question is, when you reference the affordability component, there is no option that is applicable to what is currently Site H today. Is that correct?
What I have referred to in the Housing Accountability Act of projects that can come forward on inventory sites in your housing element sites inventory does not apply to Site H, because that site is identified for above moderate income units.
Okay, that's all. I just wanted to clarify that point before we ended up with until, so I think I've got it.
Yeah, that helps me too, because
Okay.
that was, I wasn't clear on that.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, it sounded like there was somehow, if the project came forward with an
As if
affordability
somebody wanted to come
component,
and say,
then that would be buildable on Site H. And we were interrupting you and that we didn't finish that thought. So thank you for that. It was very clarifying.
I have a slew of questions, but
Yeah.
I don't want to.
No, go ahead.
No, please ask your questions.
No, please. Well, first, I would like to just say thank you for everyone's thoughtful input. Would have been slightly better if we would have listened to the chair as she asked politely multiple times, but we'll take it. And I'd like to apologize specifically to the committee for Tiburon for not being able to meet with them. That was a request beforehand, but I did just fly in after being gone for 5 days for this meeting. And so I'm glad to be here because obviously we're short stacked up here, as you can tell. But I think that this is incredibly important. It's important to me. I don't live on Paradise Cay. I do drive over there. It is beautiful. It's important to me to, be here and have this discussion. I just want to make it clear on a number of questions, just because it was clear to me that it wasn't clear for everyone. So I'd like to just maybe clarify a few things. The odds presentation is specific to the areas that are will be zoned R310. It's not what the presentation that you gave was not a design specific for Site H.
No.
You did not come up with this is what the new architecture is going to be on Site H. You came up with, these are guidelines, and you gave us some beautiful drawings that we could at least envision for any of the sites that would be zoned that way.
Are zoned R3, R310, or R4.
R3, R310, R4. Thank you. So that's helpful to understand. It was not a specific rendering of what would look like in that site.
No.
Okay. And then, yeah. Okay. There were lots of discussions around Site J. And I know we're not here to reopen the door on new sites, but it is my understanding that, we had this discussion, 6 weeks ago. We had the discussion 6 weeks before that. Since then, has Site J progressed? Have we seen presumably they've submitted something? Do they have a notice of completeness? Are they moving forward? Are they paying the fees? Is Site J?
So what I have to date is an application form and a fee. I have no supplemental information. I did provide the property owner a notice of incomplete, stating the issues that he would need to do to come back so that we could actually evaluate this. At this time, we have not done much more than that.
Okay. So Site J sounds great in theory, but right now is just in theory.
That is correct. And I believe that LAFCO also has the same application and fee, but nothing more.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. And then on the streams, so it was really helpful to understand the 50 versus 100. But can I just clarify what you had said about that, which is it's already in the existing housing plan that if it's 5 acres or below, you can build within 50 feet of a stream.
Not in the housing element, it's in the conservation element of the recently adopted general plan. Yes.
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Okay, so it's already in our adopted plan. And that's not something that somebody, I think, was effectively accusing of a fastball being thrown here to sneak in if it gets cut down. It's just a function of this is always the way it works for developers, and our 100 feet maybe was more conservative, but it's part of where we are today.
I also think that that policy has been in your previous general plan, so it was not changed.
That is correct. That did not change with this round.
Okay.
It's been in the previous
So at
general
least for
plan as
20
well.
years.
You're talking about the setback issue
The
with respect
setback
to.
for the
50
creeks have
feet
been in the previous
If
general
you're
plan
under
as
5
well.
acres on a stream. Okay. And to clarify, just to reiterate one more time, which sometimes I think in some of these meetings, it's helpful just to sort of state the facts, but the state has already approved the housing element. How would we say this?
Yes, I mean, the shorthand is it's been certified. The longer hand is it's been found to be in substantial compliance with housing element law. So yes, the state has approved your housing element.
Substantial compliance. Okay. And then going back to here, I did hear someone earlier say on the zoning, we have until January 2024 to be in compliance from a time frame perspective.
Yes, I will refrain from giving you the longer answer, but yes, the requirement is that the rezonings to meet capacity in your housing element have to be adopted by January 31, 2024.
Okay, so if for whatever reason we couldn't perform our duty tonight, it's not the end of the world yet. We still have 5 more months, but effectively we have something in front of us.
November, December, January, you have
31st,
3 months.
2024, sorry.
Yeah, and the council has to have 2 meetings in order to introduce and adopt the ordinance.
Okay.
And for clarification that, because this was my understanding, the January 2024 deadline we're talking about is to conform for zoning purposes all of the land that has been identified as complying with the various housing element issues. In this case, more specifically, we're talking about a rezone for what we're describing as R310.
So the January 31, 2024 deadline is to rezone sites to provide capacity to meet your RENA. So that is the R310, the rezoning of site H to R310. There are other programs in your housing element that require you to adopt the odds, including H-LL, which applies to site H, which requires that you have the odds in place by January 31, 2024.
And just to dig on that a little bit, that's 2 more questions, Ed. If we don't rezone, there's the potential to lose certification, but not the guarantee. It's not like if you don't have it zoned appropriately and they're in alignment. Bob's shaking his head, but I just want to understand.
If the town is making progress toward complying with your programs, I believe HCD would potentially give you some grace on that. I do not want to advise the town to miss that rezoning deadline and risk decertification of your housing element.
The very sound legal answer. I appreciate it. The town appreciates it. Okay. And then I think.
Well, there's one other issue. It's actually maybe underscoring an issue that Mary mentioned. Losing certification, correct me if I'm wrong, creates some vulnerability as it relates to potential enforcement by the Attorney General's office, no? And if I'm right, and I think I am, there also are in fact documented cases in the past couple of months of lawsuits that have been filed by the California Attorney General's office, no?
Yes.
Against municipalities in the Bay Area, no? The answer is yes, because I read it, but yeah, okay.
I apologize, Commissioner Sai. I don't know if the AG has brought those actions. I know that there are lawsuits pending against Bay Area jurisdictions.
They have been filed by the AG's office. I mean, this is my representation to the world, but they have been filed by the AG's office. Sorry, I apologize. I just wanted to emphasize that point.
You know, I appreciate having lawyers on both sides of me, so not
sides of
being
you.
one, it's very helpful, so thank you.
And does it, let's assume the housing element is revoked, does that re-subject us to the builder's remedy? If the housing element were to be revoked, does that re-subject us to the builder's remedy, which we are not subject to now?
Yes.
So there are sort of multiple vulnerabilities, which I think goes to the legal recommendation that you're providing with that, have provided or providing, which is taking into consideration the impact on the entire town. Okay. Just so a couple of things I'm just gonna, I'm going to express sort of opinion more than question. I'm going to start with that. But it's a very complex, difficult issue for us as well. I can really feel the emotion and the anger and the frustration and I know this goes to your day-to-day lives and is very difficult, and it's palpable more so than anything I've really felt or heard, in many, many years on the Planning Commission. I just want to acknowledge that. And I think in many ways, speaking for myself, not the entire commission, we sort of share that frustration because, well, there's I think a general frustration across jurisdictions in California that are grappling with these state mandates, these state laws. So that is the reality. We can't just flout the law. And the attorney for the town can't advise us to flout the law. And we take that very seriously. And it's frustrating because we're being asked to do things that aren't appropriate or right for our communities, our towns. That's how we feel. But it's also frustrating for us because throughout this process, the Planning Commission has really I have stated on the record many times and we've made recommendations to the council that alternative sites would be more appropriate. Site H doesn't feel like an appropriate site. We have concerns about it. Please consider for more density downtown. That's something that we talked about very early on, before we even got into the nitty-gritty of the general plan of the housing element, when we were just talking about the principles, the objectives. We identified downtown as a place where we thought density made sense. It's got public transportation, it's got better access, it doesn't have a number of the issues that you have raised tonight about Site H. And really recommended to the town, and I've got, there are several meetings to consider alternatives. The town council disagreed with us. We've made the recommendations consistent with what you're asking us to do, and the town council has disagreed. I am not trying to lay the blame on the town council because the town council had a different perspective than we have. We're sort of more technocratic in a way. We're not hearing from constituents across the community. And so they respectfully disagreed with our recommendations, not all the time. Sometimes they adopted our recommendation to give us all more time, for example, to consider rezoning. We didn't rezone at a meeting earlier this year to give more time to entertain Site J as a viable alternative. And so the town council, they did agree, at least in that one instance. They disagreed because they were fearful of the consequences to the entire town. And that's the perspective that they have to take. And it really makes for very difficult decisions. And it's really hard it is difficult to be to know that this is so upsetting and to not be able to fix that. But also to know that we have a duty as planning commissioners to really take all parts of the community into consideration. And also, we don't ultimately have the final say on this, the town council does. We're here tonight to make recommendations. We've made our recommendations. The town council has disagreed on this issue. So we sort of have, and now more importantly, we have a housing amount that has been with Site H. listed as on the inventory of sites has been presented to the state and has been accepted by the state. And that the council has adopted the general plan, has adopted the housing element and specific guidance in the housing element. And staff has laid out the different policies of the housing element that we are looking at in informing our decision tonight. One of which HLL specifically explicitly says that site H is to be rezoned to R310 and requiring a minimum density of 10 units per acre, and that the town planning commission is to develop and adopt odds. It's town staff, town commission, the town is to develop these odds. And so we're faced with this. These are the circumstances. This is the context in which we find ourselves tonight. It's very frustrating because I don't want to be here. I individually don't, think that I have always felt from the beginning that the downtown was a place where we should be focused on our density. A lot of people in the town do not agree with that, incidentally. So I also don't necessarily think this precludes continuing the incredible work that people are doing to look at site J, because that can be, if that became a viable site, substituted in for site H, correct?
The town could go through the process of amending the housing element to do the analysis related to site J, just as we've done with other sites.
Right.
And propose to HCD that site J, if it meets the criteria, be utilized in some fashion to provide capacity to meet your arena.
Right. So I feel like the sensible thing to do, the rational thing to do, it's not the perfect thing to do, is to move forward to prevent, to protect the town, all of the citizens, all of the residents from these multiple vulnerabilities and that we have identified tonight. Well, also that doesn't preclude moving forward to try to annex site J, to try to replace site H with site J. We don't actually have a development application in front of us. We don't have a developer who said, this is what I want to do on site H. We have a general plan. We have a housing element that identifies places where development can occur. We don't have, so a lot of people have said there's a plan, this plan, it's a terrible plan. We don't have a development plan in front of us. There's no application for development. It's nuanced, but it is a different thing. And so it's not ideal. This is not where I'd like to be today, but I believe this is kind of the sensible way forward. And I don't discount the guidance that I get from the town attorney, who is really looking at every aspect of this, and town staff and the consultants who've dedicated many, many years to this. Is not to say that this is a good outcome from your perspective. But I don't necessarily think it's the final outcome either. So those are sort of thoughts.
Can I ask a question just to follow up what you were going down the path of? So if site H were zoned today R310, and then in 3 weeks or 3 years, site J or any other site was then deemed to be adequate, and we submitted it and we got the state's alignment and they said, great, that'll count as 100 units instead. Can we go back if nothing's been built on site H and then unzone it or rezone it, I guess, back to where it was? Because if once it's zoned and you can't reverse it, then it doesn't matter if there's site JKLMN or downtown.
You're right. The question that I answered had to do with substitution of sites in your housing element, and you'd be providing additional capacity, a similar or more capacity to meet that same arena. But there are no net loss provisions that provide that the city can't just downzone a site once it's been upzoned, and we would have to look into that a little bit more. But that is correct that we have to analyze that too.
So if I may, I would just, I would echo many of the things that Chair Williams shared, but I do feel more strongly. I won't, per se throw the town council under the bus, but we are not elected officials. They are. So you've got to be thoughtful about how we get to where we are. To me, the focus for the Tiburon 2040 plan was very much designed to be about transportation and thoughtfulness. We pushed hard for a concentration downtown because downtown offers ferries, buses, bike paths, multi-purpose paths, sidewalks, and the potential for a larger road in and out of town.
And space.
And space, yeah. Oh, yeah, and by the way, restaurants and shops and a reason for people to live there and none of those things are possible on Paradise. And as beautiful as Paradise K is, so for me, and in particular, is in the town plan, in the 2040 plan, it talks about the safe and healthy transportation system and being able to make this accessible. And I don't believe that this meets those criteria. So while I do think that the odds are appropriate and I like the designs and I'd be very comfortable moving forward with those, I'm personally not comfortable moving forward on site H. And I know that that's not, it doesn't matter because we've said that many times to town council, but I'm going to say it again. And that's where I am.
And just to clarify, I mean, that was a really important point. I think a good question that this down zoning, whether or not that can happen subsequent to zoning, which it sounds like there's some work to be done. We don't know. We don't have an answer tonight. I don't think it will matter, but I am not uncomfortable making a decision that's just based on principle and just reiterating the perspective that we've had from the beginning.
I mean, again, we have 3 months and a week, I guess, for
End of January.
no, we got November, December, and January, and a week. So I'm tired, but I think I can still. So regardless, right? I mean, the town council will ultimately do what the town council feels is most appropriate. I personally, I'm appreciative that the state has already approved a plan. But again, real estate is incredibly local, hyper local in this case. So site H looks great on a map. It looks beautiful on a map. It makes a ton of sense. It's 10 acres. When you're actually here, I think it causes all kinds of problems. And I am swayed by the Lahaina analogy. Maybe we can come up with something that doesn't, but I'm swayed. It's difficult now. And I just feel strongly that there are better options that, were for reasons chosen not to pursue. And by the way, I don't think site J is necessarily a better option because it's not an option today. It's just not. And the ADUs I think is great, but if the state's not going to accept them, they're also not going to solve for that. So we can keep pushing stuff forward. But I guess the last thing I would sort of say is we've held out the builder's remedy as like it's going to be absolutely awful. But it's just the potential. One is the potential. We don't know, like if we don't rezone, we don't know for sure if we lose certification. If we lose certification and there's builder's remedy, we don't know what's going to happen with the builder's remedy. So those are all hypotheticals. Back to the, dealing in hypotheticals. What is not a hypothetical is if this site is zoned, we have no idea if we can unzone it. And if something gets built on it, it's permanent.
So are you saying that, well, I'm looking at the findings that we're being asked to make for tonight, and I actually respectfully disagree with Peter Prost, the attorney. I don't believe he's stated the finding that we're supposed to be making accurately, because we're not supposed to be finding that it's necessary to the public health and safety.
I think, Madam Chair, that he's referring to a whereas recital.
Oh,
That's at the bottom of page 1.
thank you.
one of the recommendations I'm going to make to this commission is
Okay.
that we strike that recital because I don't believe it's actually required for us to make a recital of that nature. Pending, of course, advice from our town council.
Well, thank you for pointing that out because I was really struggling to understand. We got the letter from the attorney. Because as I'm looking at the findings in the staff memorandum that come out of our code, they were just to find that they will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. And so it sounds to me, Commissioner Woodward, like you're saying you can't make that specific finding on the rezoning,
That,
not on the odds or.
thank you for putting it in much more elegant words. That is correct. That particular finding I'm struggling with.
And we haven't,
I have
over to you.
I have a few thoughts, and I'll just try to tick through them because I've mentioned a couple already. So, I think one central point that really hasn't been emphasized enough, although it's been underscored a bit by the chair and Commissioner Woodward, is that a decision has been made on multiple occasions by the elected town council as to Site H's inclusion. And that, to be fair, if we're having a fair debate and discussion about it, has been an open process. One that is not only open in the sense of town council meetings, but it's been open by virtue of the different public meetings that have happened. That's not the fault of any one person who does or doesn't go to these meetings, but there's not a reasonable debate in my mind as to whether there's been a process and whether that process has been fair. The result is different. But that's not the same thing as process. And I want to make sure that distinction is clear. When we talk about, as we have a few different times, but there was, if people will remember, there was, I think, a lone comment from a gentleman who lives in or around Seaford about Site J. The comment about Site J, I think, highlights what, in essence, is a real false choice that we're talking about. And if we're having a fair debate, this is not about Site H or Site J, because when we talk about Site J as some kind of panacea, that's my word, I admit, but I think there's been a lot of suggestion that Site J is the answer to all of our problems. The reality is that if you think there's vociferous debate about Site H, just wait till it's about Site J. That's only to say, by the way, people got opinions, and that's not a bad thing, but it is to say just how difficult this issue is. The town council has made a decision that Site H should be included. So it then, for me, as a member of this commission, comes down to ultimately what is our role and obligation. And at least part, if not a significant part of what we're trying to do, is protect this town. Now, protecting this town means protecting the residents and ensuring that property developments that are being done are fair, are reasonable, etc. But it also means protecting the town from unreasonable risk of litigation, from spending its treasure on fighting lawsuits, all of these things. And by the way, that's either private lawsuits, lawsuits by the Attorney General's office, etc. So for us, in thinking through what it is that we do today, part of it has to be, I think, in recognition of what it is that the town council has already instructed us to do. We've made a recommendation, actually in a few different ways, to the town council about our feeling about Site H. And the town council has said quite clearly, if again, we're being fair about this, they want Site H included. For purposes of today and being asked about the zoning, I will say, I've got concerns about Site H. I've said it before. I've got deep concerns about Site H. I also have concerns about Site J, which is why I called it a false choice. But because the council has made an instruction to us about its inclusion, this is the discussion we have with Bob, in the inclusion in the land use map. Bob, I'm sorry if I didn't use the right term. The question becomes whether or not this commission is going to obstruct the process of not facilitating the decisions that have been made by the council. I cannot participate in obstructing that process. The town council making a decision that Site H should be included is a decision for the town council to change if it wants to. And that includes what Commissioner Woodward talked about, which is the possibility of either replacing or adding Site J or any other site to it. That said, I think that there are, consistent with the last meeting that we had, and a lot of Sturm und Drang that I required of staff with respect to language that I asked, I think there needs to be more clear language than exists right now in the resolution about exactly what it is that we're talking about. And I made a reference before to this two-dimensionality, three-dimensionality of things in terms of the recommendations we put forward to the town council. I think the council needs to know that the decision they made to include side H is one that they need to stick with if that's what they decide to do. But as it relates to these this zoning issue and the odds regulation, I think number one, we need to include a recital that indicates, and it might be here on the edges, but I think there needs to be a more clear recital that talks about the fact that the town council adopted a land use map that includes 4576 Paradise Drive as high density housing for moderate income households. I think that needs to be pretty clearly stated, because to me, the through line that gets to the adoption of regulations and odds regulations and a rezoning specifically goes through that finding that was made and ruled and adopted by the town council. Number two, I think we need to remove the whereas clause that is located at the bottom of page 1 that says that whereas the planning commission finds the amendments made by the proposed ordinance are necessary for the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. I don't know that that is true, because I don't know that that's a finding that the commission needs to make. Third, I think that consistent with the first suggestion that I've made is, I think in the actual findings section, which is section 1 findings, there needs to be another reference to the fact that the findings themselves, and specifically I'm talking about section 1 subpart A, that this finding under the municipal code is because of the council's decision to adopt the map that includes site H. And again, the reason I'm doing that, I'm purposely trying to use repetitive language, is because I'm trying to very closely tether the recommendation that the commission is making to the council. Because what I'm concerned about is that following tonight's meeting, putting aside the transcript that the council members can read, the decision that they're going to make and consider is going to be divorced from the fact that it is not so much a recommendation in a vacuum that they're considering of the planning commission, but rather it's a recommendation the planning commission is making based upon the multiple findings that the town council has made, which include overruling the planning commission. To me, that's consistent with our obligations as planning commission members to facilitate and not obstruct good government. But I think it also leaves the decision where it should be left, which is the elected members of the council to either stay consistent with the decision they've made, or, as they're entitled to do, reconsider based upon viewpoints of neighbors, whether they're Tiburon voters or not, but neighbors and other voters as well in Tiburon who have voiced their opinion. And that also, I will conclude, includes the folks who have advocated against site J.
Question for you on that. If in doing that, there's a opportunity at the town council meeting to sort of reconsider, which, late in the day, not sure that they will, but there's that opening that door. Do you have any concerns about this unanswered question about can you undo the zoning, the rezoning that we do? Or that is being proposed that we do? And is that something to put back to to give staff an opportunity to answer that question for the town council?
Well, I think I'm not giving a legal opinion, obviously, but I'm giving an opinion on this. So I'm not entirely convinced, mostly because I haven't been educated yet by the town council, that there is not an opportunity to be able to replace another property. It does not seem consistent with me that there would not be that opportunity to do so. And I'll conclude my opinion, and perhaps I'll be educated by the answer under the law from the town council. If Madam Chair, what you're suggesting is, maybe not, is that, does it make sense for us to include a finding that there should be consideration for another site? I think we can, but I don't know if that's what you were suggesting. Mary, did you?
If I may, Commissioner Williams, members.
Yeah.
Chair Williams, members of the commission. So just to reiterate this issue on the no net loss, or to provide you with a more definitive answer, there are two components to no net loss. And one is if you want to change the zoning on a site that's been developed or been zoned to provide capacity for housing, or if there's a site in your inventory, in order to reduce the density on that site, you have to increase density somewhere else. So you're correct, Commissioner Sy, that there is an opportunity if a site is downzoned. If there's a concurrent upzoning, you can take that action. Does that answer your question?
It does in my mind.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for looking that up.
And that's consistent with what I think should be the
Right,
case, that
right.
that none of these things are in such concrete that it cannot be changed by a town where circumstances arise. It does make me think. And I'm gonna have to lean on Dina a little bit, because I'm gonna have to, I don't know what we put in our past resolution, but there is the possibility that we could include something in the resolution that I think is consistent with what we've said before, which is the consideration of other sites for that space. So am I right? Because I think we asked for inclusion in a
At the last meeting you did, it looked like you did in reviewing the minutes. And so there may be from that, whatever the outcome of that, the resolution from that meeting, just the last meeting.
You did it
August,
with
yeah.
respect to site H. You did that before.
So, to me, again, we speak to the council through these resolutions that we adopt. And I frankly think we're doing a disservice to the council if the council doesn't recognize both the feeling that the commission has, as well as what it's trying to accomplish in order to facilitate the decisions that the council's already made. Again, we're not trying to frustrate the purpose of what the council has already decided for this town. But I think it wouldn't be, it might be helpful to the process, frankly, for the council to see consistent with one of our whereas clauses before that feeling of the commission.
So I think these are, I'd like to go through all of I've been taking note of all of the proposals that have been made to the resolution, changes to the resolution. I think, I started out with, trying to balance all of these competing considerations. And Commissioner Woodward, it was such food for thought, and I share your strong feelings about where we are in this process. I think that I am comforted in knowing that, these things can be moving on parallel tracks. We can sort of meet our obligations under the obligations that we have before us as a result of decisions made by the elected town council members, as a result of the, state laws and regulations. To move forward to meet those obligations, while also encouraging, not losing sight of the fact that this doesn't have to be the final outcome vis-a-vis this location. And to encourage, someone made a comment about being, looking at these things, working creatively, tapping into the strength of the community, the skills of the community. I think that's what the community is, that's what's happening now. Commissioner Sy and I had an opportunity to really witness that, and the very, very diligent, constructive, hard work that's being done to move alternatives forward, whether it's site J is reasonable or not. The process of constructively moving forward is happening now. And it's commendable. It's very commendable and impressive. But I just don't see a way where I I am in favor of proceeding in the way that Commissioner Sai has recommended, making strong statements, making clear statements or clarifying our statements and clauses in the resolution, cleaning up some language, tightening up some language around, someone brought up the, I think you had some good language to bring, and forgive me, the definition of the R310 in alignment with the prior sort of definition. Using the same language and not explicitly saying that it's there for a certain type of, you know, it was the affordable housing, the second sentence of that.
And that is
clause,
actually
yeah.
my fourth suggestion for the commission to consider, the edits that I verbally kind of presented during the course of our question period, which relate to some of the typographical issues, as well as conforming the language of R310 to be consistent with R3.
And I'm wondering if we could go through, we've talked about a number of different changes. Oh, so, you know, I think, and I'm not, just wanted to give you an opportunity to express, you know, further thoughts after all of this talking.
No, I mean, I appreciate having the thoughts, especially, you know, Commissioner Sai always eloquent in how he puts it, and it's helpful to kind of hear the thoughts. I do have a perspective that, you know, there's 3 months left, so from my point of view, I think there is a time to facilitate, and there is a time to, you know, potentially obstruct. And it's not that that is not the legal definition, of course, but you know, the idea that I think the town council isn't hearing. In fact, I watched the last several meetings, and you know, they're not taking the guidance, they're not taking the advice, they're not listening or even reading through all of the whereas and the findings from my perspective. So I don't think there's much more that we can do. We can put in the strong language, and I think that, you know, it helps us cement our positions. So I understand your point of view.
But it sounds like you're not comfortable making the findings that would move us forward with the rezoning.
I am not.
And you're comfortable in the odds.
I am.
All of the other parts.
Correct. But we can still move forward. You can move forward with a majority.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we'll walk through the proposed amendments that we've talked through over the course of the conversation. And starting with the resolution itself, I think that would be the natural place to start. I want to make sure I've got the right packet in front of me, yeah. Because we had an updated packet. So this is a resolution of the Planning Commission. We have the first few pages. And what it would be very helpful as we're going through this, if sometimes we'll go through, we're going to state them if we could be, and then we end up having to restate them. It'd be nice to avoid that if, as we're stating the language, if we could have it recorded, and then we could just make the motion subject to the revisions that we've agreed to. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So starting with, I want to make sure. I think it was the last sentence of the first. Oh, you wanted to add a whereas, a clause.
So I would suggest we add a whereas clause. It would be the second whereas clause. So it doesn't exist now, but it would be number 2. And the whereas clause would be if we can word for word or very closely word for word utilize the whereas language we've had in prior resolution with respect to asking the council to reconsider other sites. That would be my suggestion for this commission, to include that language. Mary, you're giving me a look of, okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if I was not making sense on that.
It's
Apologies, Commissioners.
Okay, no, that's
sitting up straight.
Sorry, just want to make sure.
Your prior, but just since I've interrupted you, my recollection is your prior resolution where you made a suggestion that the town council consider alternative sites related to increased density in the downtown and potentially ADUs. So I don't believe you're directing a change related to downtown density and ADUs, but alternative sites to site H is what I'm hearing.
That you're right, but again, we're all kind of debating recollections right now, but I'm pretty sure there was, because this has come up before, where we have, I think I have asked for language specifically speaking to the council about the feeling of the commission. Is this language that we can find? I don't know if we have our prior resolutions here, but in the absence of that, what my recommendation would be is directing staff to come up with whereas language. It would be whereas clause number 2, a recital that speaks to the fact that site H, that there should be consideration for alternatives to site H. And we can try to hammer out language now, but I'm still certain that we had done this before in a prior resolution.
Packets, yeah.
We're gonna try to find it in the packet. I think we just simply I'm referring to downtown and the ADUs. That's what my recollection is, but I could be wrong. But this is simpler in the sense that we would request that the council consider alternative sites to site H.
Yes.
That's simpler, actually. It doesn't, so I would say that whereas on October 25th, 2023, the planning commission held a public hearing and I don't know what to request and request that the council consider alternative sites to site H. I have to figure out what and discussed or concluded, or my brain's a little slow right now too, but yeah, it's sort of like that.
So maybe the language we should use is whereas the planning commission has previously expressed its concern to the town council with respect to the inclusion of site H.
Slow down just a bit so we can. I want them to record this.
Whereas the planning commission has previously expressed its concern about the inclusion of site H in the, and then insert language that refers to the housing element, whatever it is. Then it gets a bit more, a bit of the prolix of whether it's the housing element or whatever the reference is that needs to be made. That I think might be enough for us to include. Does that make sense?
Because it missed all I'm really getting, whereas the planning commission has previously expressed its, and then.
Yeah, so the reason I reframed it that way is because a recital like this, whether it's in a contract or something like this, is not really so much about directing something affirmative. You must do this. Instead, it's just stating a fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Circumstance.
So, and I'm happy, as I almost always am, for staff to wordsmith some of that, but I wanted to make sure at least the essence of that. Again, this is a recommendation for the commission to consider. That be included. And again, the reason I think is because it's important for the council to see kind of the nature of why some of these decisions are being made, the recommendations that are being made. So that's the first. The second is I think there needs to be, as a factual matter, the inclusion of a whereas clause that indicates that and it actually might be a change to what currently exists as the second whereas clause. So here it talks about the council, and there's a slight typo that talks about the adoption of the housing element on May 22nd. It should be 2023.
Or 203.
Yeah. And then thereafter adopted amendments to the housing element. So I think in this particular recital, we should include the fact that in the adoption, and it might be that it was in the adoption of the housing element, there was also the adoption of the land use map, right? That included 4576 Paradise Drive. Isn't that right? That's how we get to where,
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
so, and by the way, if that's what it is, if it was in the adoption of the general plan, regardless of the
That's
date.
correct. It would have been the general plan. and not the
Okay,
housing.
so if it's the adoption of the general plan that included site H, which is 4576 Paradise, then I think that what we should include in this whereas clause is that the general plan was adopted on X date. That included 4576 Paradise Drive as a high density for moderate income households. Again, whatever specific phrasing.
And that was on
staff can
May, that was on May 22nd, 2023, that the town council adopted the general plan.
Sure. So if I may.
Oh, including the housing element.
Right, so we would say the town council adopted general plan 2020-40 on May 22, 2023, including the 2023-2031 housing element and the land use map designation for site H as, and then the language from very high density
Yeah.
residential.
Yeah, exactly. In the footnote, again, for that change for the commission to consider is the fact that I think, again, it's important for the council to see how we work through the math to get through where we are. The third, so that's two things we talked about, the addition of a whereas clause, a change to the whereas clause that's currently number 2. The third is the removal of the whereas clause at the bottom of page 1, which is the one that relates to the amendments made by the proposed ordinance being necessary for the protection of the public health, et cetera. I just don't think that one is necessary to include. And then the next suggestion, as noted, is in section 1 findings. That in section 1 subdivision A, that we include at the beginning of that sentence something to the effect of, and we can wordsmith this, because the town council previously adopted the general land use map on May 22, 2023 that included, and then Mary, I would literally use the identical language you just said. And again, very intentionally repeating this language in section 1 subdivision A. It would then, at the end of that, have a comma. The planning commission finds that the proposed amendments pursuant to Tiburon Municipal Code insert are consistent with the requirements of. So I'm both adding language and I'm also trying to cut down on a couple of predicates that are in there. And then.
Does that make sense? Do you have that? One?
It does. If you don't mind, if we're gonna make that clarification, you should probably also clarify that it's because of the housing element. Because there's a lot of changes that are being proposed that are part of the housing programs.
That's
I think you can take.
That's okay.
Entire, yeah.
That is okay with me.
Had been more expansive previously in the whereas clause.
That's okay with me. And then the other changes are the ones that I noted previously, which I'm just going to tick off again, but I'm happy to go into depth if staff or Mary needs me to. The first of that group
8 and 9. Is this 8?
Is page 8. That's what's proposed as red lines subdivision F, R310. I think the language needs to conform with the language of R3, except for what makes R310 R310.
So I think it's just taking out the first sentence.
It's really the first sentence.
Revising the first sentence so that it's identical to the first sentence of the R3 of E immediately above it. The first full sentence.
Yeah, and by the way, I defer because it could be the case Bob, you should take a look at this. It could be the case that the sentence that we should conform is actually from R4, that first sentence. It might be more suitable for that sentence in R4 to be the same, the first sentence in R4 to be the same one we use for R310. Yeah?
So just,
Okay.
Yeah.
just to be clear, if I may, so the R310 in subsection F
Yes.
would say the R310 zone is intended to promote and encourage the establishment and maintenance of a suitable environment for higher density residences in areas appropriate by location and character for multifamily dwellings, period. And then we keep the last sentence of the R310 to remain as is.
Yes. Okay, and then on page 9, we had that minor discussion about the term of art, site plan and architectural review. And I think that Mary had made a suggestion, which I don't need her to go through again, but I think we should, okay, so maybe we do, adopt a change that says, and again, I'm talking about
And I do
now
have that written down. If we-
subdivision D1. This is shall be subject to approval of.
The design review board as provided in section 16-52.020 in parenthetical site plan and architectural review. And as yes, that's it. And then you also wanted to add the appeal language to incorporate the appeals. Yes.
And if I
appeal
can make
process.
just a minor suggestion,
Yeah.
instead of saying design review board, if you say review authority,
Okay.
it then encompasses
Whatever.
design review
Right.
board, administrative review and appeal.
Yes, approval of the design authority.
Yeah.
Yeah, review authority. And then we, I think, entrust in you the appropriate language to add to incorporate the appeal to the extent you want it.
It's done if you say review
Oh, good.
authority.
Okay,
So we'll
thank
make
you.
that
Thank
change
you.
to
Yes, of
D1
course, of
and
course.
D1 and D2.
All of the different stages of review.
D1 and D2, and then we need to add the language in D2 that it's all improvements proposed for the R3,
Yes.
comma, R310 and R4.
Yes,
zones.
yes, that would
Right,
be.
so that change will also occur in D2. But there is also the additional change that needs to be made in D2, which is
Mhm.
in that first sentence, all improvements, what now reads all improvements proposed for the R3 zone needs to say R3, comma, R310, comma, and R4 zones.
And there's actually one little typo as well, which I'm looking for now. Very minor, on page 28 of 39. For B, there's just a wall, in all of their locations, no fence or walls shall exceed a height of 72. Yeah, just a fence or wall. So just strike the second. I'm actually, no fences or walls. Oh, yes, or maybe that is oh,
That's fine.
I was thinking, I thought you were gonna tell me that there is such a thing as walls.
No, but a couple of other proposed revisions to the ordinance. Matt shared two of those with you in the presentation. One had to do with an exception regarding grading, and the other was the exception regarding the first floor level of a residence when you've got an underground garage.
Yeah, I think if there's
yeah,
language that you're,
And then I have one other
proposing.
after that.
So page 18 of 39. Subsection, whatever it is, 3A. Now reads, the residential ground floor shall not be more than 4 feet above finished grade. And the recommendation is that it be modified to say the residential ground floor shall not be more than 4 feet above finished grade, except within 20 feet of a vehicle entrance to a below grade garage used by multiple households.
okay,
And then the other adjustment would be on
page 31 of 39, near the top of the page. It's subsection J1A. J1A and the revision would be in the first hyphenated bullet. Let me read how it now reads. Development shall not occur on slopes that exceed 30% using a map with contour intervals of not less detailed than 2 feet, except to allow grading, site improvements, including retaining walls and buildings, to occur within 25 feet of the perimeter of slopes that exceed 30%, and have that that bullet reframed to say, allow grading, site improvements, including retaining walls and buildings, to occur within 25 feet of the perimeter of slopes that are less than 30% and have a contiguous area of at least 5,000 square feet. So that the effect of that is that that additional buffer or extension of the developable area is really limited to large being adjacent to larger available areas and not small
Understood.
flatter areas that may be isolated.
And I had one more suggestion, and this was based on a comment that Peter, I believe it's Prow, made in his comments tonight. He mentioned that we are allowing a decreased setback from streams of 25 feet. So let me explain what is in the code here that we've added. So in that's on page 32 of 39, subsection 3, biological resources. This was added because for projects that would comply with state law to allow ministerial processing, in those cases, there would be no CEQA. So the question is, how do we deal with protecting biological resources when you don't have CEQA studies and mitigations? So we've added this section for those types of projects that are ministerial. And if you look in subsection 3C, it says the project shall provide a minimum 100-foot buffer from, and these were added beyond the stream setbacks, but 100-foot buffer from habitat for special status species, wetlands, riparian areas, oak woodlands, and habitat of significant value as identified in the biological resources assessment, et cetera, et cetera. And then it says, unless a reduced buffer that is not less than 25 feet is determined to be adequate to protect such resources by the qualified biologist. The problem is that that does run counter to the general plan program C9, which C9 allows a 50-foot buffer, no exceptions. And so to not run afoul of that, my suggestion is in C to take out riparian areas, which would include streams, and only allow this additional buffer to apply and the ability to reduce the buffer by a biologist to areas that would not include streams.
And if I may, Chair Williams, I agree with Mr. Brown. I would just say that it wasn't the intent of this section to replace the conservation policy C9, but in order to avoid any confusion, I think that the edit suggested by Mr. Brown is a good one.
That makes sense to me. Okay,
So the last change that I suggest is in section 2 of the recommendations. Well, it's actually only one recommendation, but it says recommendations, but that's somewhat minor. But I suggest that to kind of finish out the other suggestions that I made with respect to how we're speaking to the council, that we include language, again, in section 2, it currently says the planning commission hereby recommends. I think we should consider saying recommends that, comma, in order to effectuate the town council's adoption of the 2023 to 2031 housing element on May 22, 2023, that included um, 4576 Paradise Drive as whatever the language is, Mary, moderate income, a moderate income household or something, whatever, or whatever the specific wording is, comma, the town council adopt the zoning ordinance, and then the rest of the language as it currently exists.
Chair Williams and Commissioner Sai, if I may, I would add, if you would consider it, so it's the adoption of the 2023-31 housing element on May 22, 2023, as amended on September 20th, 2023. And then I think the language that you're suggesting is that includes 4576 Paradise Drive as an opportunity site for 93 moderate income units.
Yeah, yes. That's fine with me. And then it would, that clause would end with a comma. And then the rest of the sentence would stay the same. Recommends that, right? Insert, comma, the town council adopt the zoning ordinance. And the rest as it exists.
Okay. So I think,
Mary, does that make sense? That, okay.
yeah,
Thank you. Yes.
yeah. So, on that note, I would move to adopt the resolution, incorporating the revisions that we have made here tonight, recommending approval to the town council of the proposed amendments to chapter 19 of the municipal code and zoning map.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the motion carries. Oh, and with, I'm sorry. That's a nay. 2 in favor, 1 opposed. And the meeting is adjourned.